There's these biological systems that keep us fit, keep us healthy. And if we're not careful to take good care of them, they too will wane in their power to defend us. And that's actually how we wind up getting sick.
As you were describing that, Dr. Lee, I was thinking about a bath, right? And I was thinking, okay, well, if an overflowing bath, when the water goes up and it starts to leak out, if that's the disease, or let's say that's cancer, every day we're sort of filling up our bath, let's say. But as long as the drain's working well, the water's staying down, it's not getting to the top. But if we're doing enough stuff that's actually blocking that drain, then actually we're not going to be able to repair the rising water level, and that water level is going to sort of spill out, and then we've got a disease, then we've got cancer. It's probably not a perfect analogy, but do you think there's something in that?
Yeah. Let me kind of build on what you just said. So you've got the drain keeping the water flowing and clean and at the right level, and you've got the water coming in, and that balance of where the water line needs to be. Now let's add some more. Now let's take a garbage pail filled with food bits, and now let's pour those in the drain as well. Okay. Yeah. Now you're contaminating the water. And if you have more of the drain opening to remove those bits, you're going to keep the water clean. But if you actually stop up the drain, then the garbage starts to accumulate. And that's actually part of the problem as well, is damage to our body accumulates over time. And that's why the bad decisions that we make really take, over the course of months or years, they have a consequence. And the good decisions also have the same type of time honored ability to build up on our behalf.
Well, in terms of empowering people, in terms of what they can do, and this is what a lot of your work is about, food has power here. Specifically, we're talking about DNA damage. Food has the ability to, make that drain bigger or put new drains in the bath, so there's more ability to kind of repair the damage. So, we're talking again about these 5 defense systems. I've gone straight in for number 4 that you mentioned, DNA. Could you maybe mention some foods that we can think about consuming that might have an impact on this particular defense system?
Yeah, well, so some amazing research has been done looking at which foods can help protect our DNA. And some of them are very ordinary, like a kiwi fruit that you might eat at breakfast. That brown fuzzy ball, you cut it open, it's got this emerald green interior with a little white starburst. It's kind of tart and sweet at the same time. Well, that kiwi is packed with vitamins and antioxidants. And it's been shown that eating just one kiwi a day can actually cause your blood to be fortified to neutralize about 60% of the incoming damage from DNA. And if you eat 3 kiwis a day, okay, which is pretty easy, right? I mean, you peel it, you cut it up, you put it into a yogurt, okay? It's something that's simple, actually will help your DNA build itself back up so that damaged DNA will be repaired. So don't forget, think about the way of protecting your DNA. I remember an old video game called Missile Command. And this is where from the top of the screen, there are all these missiles that are descending down on your planet. And what you had to do is to be able to fire and try to neutralize all the missiles. And that's what antioxidants actually do. But it's really hard to prevent all the missiles from coming in. And so occasionally you actually have one that gets through the shields and creates a crater. That's damage. And so neutralizing the incoming is like antioxidants, but building back the damaged DNA, well, that's important too, because that's like patching a pothole in the highway, in the roadside, so other cars don't have a problem on it. And so here's an example of a food, a kiwi, that can actually do that. But there are other foods that can also have varying degrees of protection of your DNA as well.
Yeah, it makes me happy, that example, because my dad, who's no longer alive, I remember as a kid, Dr. Lee, he used to say to me, keep eating kiwi fruits. He'd come back from the supermarket with, these bags of kiwi fruits. So they're really, really good for you. They're rich in vitamin C. Which of course is true, but obviously you're taking it up a notch now. You're saying, yes, it's rich in vitamin C, but actually it's also helping us repair DNA. And I guess to me, there's a wider point here, which is, my dad, 20, 30 years ago, probably said it's rich in vitamin C. So thought there was a value on feeding his children that food because of the impact on our health. And as science progresses, I guess we're learning more about the magic of this, quite ordinary food, the kiwi fruits. It makes me wonder, how much about food do we still not know? Like we're learning. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like we think we know so much, and of course we know more than we knew 20 years ago, but what are we going to find out in 10 years and 20 years about the magical properties of these foods?
Well, what you're actually talking about is what I'm working on, which is a new field of research called food as medicine. So the slogan or the saying food as medicine was attributed to Hippocrates, 3,000 years ago. But in fact, back then there were no medicines. So food was the only thing that was around. Today we have a lot of medicines. And it's because in the quest to develop medicines, we've employed some really deep science, molecular biology, genomics. We can drill right down inside the cell to figure out what happens and why and what the consequences are and how the cells work together. Well, one of the reasons that I went into nutrition was because I realized that food was something that could be used for prevention. You wouldn't want to use drugs for prevention. But the problem with food, nutrition, the criticism that many of us in the medical world have, about the idea of using food for healing was historically it was the lack of evidence, right? So we have a lot of evidence about drugs. We almost have nothing about foods. I mean, that's the dismissive tone that I think you probably were exposed to as well as I for most of our education. However, what's happening now, and I'm one of the people leading the charge in this, we can use the same technologies that are used to develop pharmaceuticals. And instead of throwing a drug into the system to see what happens, we can actually start to throw foods into those systems and see what happens as well. In fact, you can even compare foods and drugs and see which one wins. And that's something that I've been doing for the last decade, is really trying to use the same rigorous scientific methodology used for drug development in order to be able to study the impact of food.
Yeah, and I think you are in many ways uniquely placed to do this and move this field on, because you've got so much experience in the development of drugs and in research. So obviously you know how that whole system works. And because you are this way inclined to see the healing potential of foods, you can actually do that. And I feel that's really important to get that kind of traction, primarily with the medical profession, but also I think across wider society. I've had on the podcast all kinds of people on in the past talking about various aspects of food. You're like, Professor Felice Jacka from Australia, who conducted the SMILES trial, showing how food can impact and in some cases reverse depression. Dr. Drew Ramsey, this nutritional psychiatrist in New York, using food to help people with their moods. But I do think there's something very fresh about your approach that I really, really like and resonate with. This idea that food and drugs can be compared. Can you give us an example of that, where you've seen that food might have equal benefits, if not more benefits, than a drug?
Yeah, well, so we have been developing treatments for cancer that are designed to starve a cancer by cutting off its blood supply. And that's the process of angiogenesis that is hijacked by tumors, by cancer cells, to selfishly develop their own blood supply, right? So I told you the body has normal circulation to feed healthy tissues. Well, cancers can sometimes hijack that. So one of the new ways to treat cancer is actually to give a drug that can intercept a cancer's ability to recruit a private blood supply. That's starving a cancer, cutting off its blood supply, can't get oxygen and nutrients, can't grow. Okay, so I was one of the people to help develop the systems to develop those drugs. There have been over a dozen drugs that have been approved by health authorities to be able to achieve this in colon cancer, brain cancer, lung cancer, so on and so forth. Now, in that same system, we've actually thrown different food substances. And as an example, we took a drug that is a designer drug to stop angiogenesis, And then we actually also through blinded, so we didn't know which one was which, a substance that turned out to be the powdered extract from just regular green tea, a cup of green tea. And we found that they were, in that system, they went head to head against each other. And you could actually get the same effect in that test system. So now the question is, we've looked at this in the lab. How does this actually play out in real people, in the real world? Well, there are studies now that show that even 2 to 3 cups of tea a day can lower your risk of developing ovarian cancer, for example, by up to 50%. This is a gigantic study in Europe called the EPIC study that have looked at all the different food patterns and dietary consumptions over time to look for these correlations. And so food as medicine research is different from pharmaceutical research. Okay. Pharmaceutical research, you take one pill or one drug and you get a group of people to make them as similar as possible. And then the only thing you do to people is give them that one drug, and everything else is, we hope, to control it so that there's no other variables. Well, foods can't be studied like that. You can't give somebody only green tea to drink for, months at a time, or a tomato to eat. That's the only thing that you can eat. And foods don't work like drugs. I mean, a drug, you could squash a headache, in 20 minutes with a powerful drug or a migraine. But with food, the benefits of food, because it's so much more natural and because it leverages your body's own defense systems, the benefits take time and they build up over time. And so you're talking about research studies that could take months or years even to fully appreciate just how beneficial that is. So this is how we do food as medicine research. We look for benefits in real populations of real people, like people drinking green tea. How well does that prevent different types of cancer? Then we back it up to say, can we run a small clinical trial, a small group of people that we can control to see if we get a similar effect? Then we go back into the lab and we kind of say, well, now what happens if you feed animals that actually with green tea, can we, an animal subject, can we actually see that benefit? Then we can even go deeper and start going that mile deep. What happens at the cellular level? What happens at the genetic level? And so food as medicine is really taking that macroscopic community-wide level view and then drilling it right down to that molecular pathway. And so I happen to be one of the people that actually can traverse that entire journey with what I've done.
It's just so fascinating, very, very exciting about the future. That study you mentioned about a few cups of tea a day, reducing your risk of developing cancer. Was that black tea or green tea?
It's green tea. But black tea actually also has different benefits as well. So a study out of Italy did something really amazing. Well, so look, let's back up for a second. So what everybody would recognize is green tea. It's kind of like the kind of tea that you get in a sushi restaurant, Japanese restaurant, matcha. And it's very trendy. And of course, the trend goes back thousands of years in Asia. And then there's black tea, classic English breakfast tea or Earl Grey tea. In fact, I have a little tin of it. I happen to have a tin of Earl Grey tea here, right here. I love tea. And most people have said, this was the thinking previously, that green tea is really great for you because it's green. It's got filled with antioxidants, and it's got all these polyphenols in it. And black tea, well, when the British brought it back from Asia, they couldn't actually bring fresh green tea with this long ocean voyage. So they fermented and dried it. And that drying and fermenting actually destroys those polyphenols. So it doesn't have much good. Like, might taste good, but it doesn't really have the healthful properties. Well, this is where science, again, is able to heat up that knife and cut through the butter to kind of see exactly what the story is. And it turns out that black tea actually is quite active. I studied Chinese green tea, Japanese green tea, and studied Earl Grey. And so you can, besides comparing foods with drugs, you can compare foods with foods to find out which is the best kind. I was interested in is Japanese sencha or Chinese green tea, jasmine tea, or is Earl Grey? Which one is better when you throw them into the system? And we found, actually surprisingly, that Earl Grey, the black tea with flavored with bergamot, actually was the most potent tea when you combined when you looked at all three side by side. other thing about black tea that's really amazing, it's been studied by researchers in Italy, is that black tea actually can call out those stem cells from your bone marrow to increase their levels in your circulation. And when your stem cells are circulating in your blood, they come out of their hiding spots in their storage container, the garage that the paint cans were stored in. They come out like bees flying out of a hive, and then they circulate in your body looking for organs to repair. So wherever you need a little bit of renewal, regeneration, your stem cells will fix it invisibly.
Yeah.
And so black tea can actually spark that repair and regenerative process.
As you are describing these different foods and their actions, I keep thinking back to this list of 5 defense systems that I'm just fascinated by. And obviously, we spoke about DNA, number 4, but you've now mentioned tea, I think, and green tea and black tea. It can impact stem cells, but it can also impact other parts of these defense systems. So presumably, are there some foods which only work on one defense system from the knowledge that we have so far, and other foods which can kind of hit more and potentially all 5 at the same time?
Yeah, well, so here's a principle of nature. Mother Nature tends to be incredibly clever and pack multiple roles in any given food. So while researchers may have only looked at one food in one particular way. So for example, I'm trying to think about something that would be useful from a whole food perspective that has only been found to do one thing. Actually, I have to say most of the foods that I know of that I've done research on, when you take a careful look, they can activate multiple health defenses. So I think that that's really where we're at, is really peeling back and discovering the utility, the multi-pronged utility of different foods.
That makes sense though, doesn't it? Because these defense systems, they don't work in isolation. They help, they obviously have to work as interconnected systems together. So it kind of makes sense that food, particularly food that's been around for thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, are also going to have these multiple type effects.
Yeah.
If we go to angiogenesis, which you've already mentioned, and that was the first health defense system that you talked us through. This I found really, really interesting when researching your work. Your TED Talk, which of course has been viewed by millions of people now, there was a really interesting slide towards the end where I very much resonate with this idea. What's the root cause of multiple diseases? Can we, address the root cause, and then we're automatically going to take care of multiple different downstream consequences. And that was a very powerful slide showing that when angiogenesis is working well, or when it's not working well, what can happen in the body. Could you just talk us through that lens, angiogenesis? Because I think that's really interesting. And then you also mentioned cancer and blood supply. And again, could you just talk to us about cancer and how it can only grow to a certain size unless it gets its own blood supply as well, please?
Yeah, sure. Our circulation is these blood vessels, this network, and the blood is really the vehicle that carries oxygen and nutrients and everything else that our cells need to survive. So when we have the right amount, all of our organs are functioning properly. Sometimes we need a few extra blood vessels. So if you're working out and trying to build your muscles, when your muscles get bigger, it requires more blood vessels, bigger blood supply, no problem. Your angiogenesis system can actually supply and help to grow more of those blood vessels, but they keep it in proper volume. So not too many, not too few blood vessels. Very important principle of angiogenesis. That's health. We have good circulation. Now, here's what happens in disease. When you don't have enough blood vessels, what are some of the typical diseases that occur when you don't have enough blood flow? Well, one of the things is after a heart attack, if you cannot grow enough blood vessels, parts of your heart will get weaker. You can get heart failure, and a heart attack can actually be even fatal if you have inadequate blood vessels to try to bypass any temporary blockage. Same thing as a stroke. We know after there's a stroke, sometimes a clot gets sent to the brain and results in that type of stroke. your angiogenesis defense system is scrambled to be able to immediately generate tiny little bypass muscles, get around that blockage to save the brain beyond the blockage. If you can't get enough blood vessels growing in that situation, parts of your brain die, and you wind up being paralyzed or having deficits after a stroke. In diabetes, many people with diabetes lose their legs. They have their legs amputated, mostly because they have problems healing wounds on their feet.
Yeah.
Now, the reason is because their nerves actually they go numb. Their nerves die back, diabetic neuropathy. And the reason that the nerves die back is because there's inadequate blood vessels feeding those nerves. So now in diabetes, some of those nerves in your feet and even your fingertips actually don't have enough blood supply. They die. When the nerves die, you can't feel when you step on a pebble and you create a little hole. That hole gets infected. That wound now also won't heal because it doesn't have enough blood vessels. That's an example of inadequate angiogenesis and cause a problem. And so now medical treatments actually have been designed to actually try to stimulate more blood vessels, to coax more vessels in where they're needed, but foods can also help do it as well. On the flip side, when you have too many blood vessels, and this is where cancer comes into play, it turns out that we all have cancer in our body. I mean, everyone fears cancer. The word actually, causes a shiver to run down most people's spine. Yeah. Everyone knows somebody who's been touched by cancer. And I would say most people know somebody who's died of cancer, actually. And so this is actually one of the most fearsome diseases, but yet biologically, we are actually all forming cancers in our body all the time, because all it takes for our 40 trillion cells to do is to make those little mistakes. Remember, I told you 10,000 mistakes are fixed every day. A few of those stinking through will turn into a microscopic tumor, microscopic cancer. And this is called cancer without disease, because a tiny little mutant cancer can grow up to the size of the tip of a ballpoint pen, and then it's frozen like a pimple. Can't go any bigger because it doesn't have a blood supply. No oxygen, no food, nothing to feed it. And so those little microscopic cancers sit there until another one of our defense systems, our immune system, wings by like a cop on a beat and sees this abnormal cell sitting on that street corner in a good neighborhood, and then says, "Get in the car, we're taking you away." And so our immune system destroys these microscopic cancers. But some microscopic cancers are able to hijack our body's regular angiogenesis defense system and selfishly grow blood vessels to feed themselves. Now, I worked in a lab studying angiogenesis, and we discovered that once an avascular or bloodless cancer is able to get vessels to touch it, the moment that touches it, the cancer can grow 16,000 times in 2 weeks. So literally, angiogenesis out of control is a trigger, an explosive trigger for tumor growth. And in fact, we know that if you can cut off the blood supply or prevent tumors from growing their blood supply, you can actually keep these cancers harmless for long periods of time. And so this is what foods are able to do. Foods that inhibit angiogenesis, they won't stop the good blood vessels from growing, because good blood vessels are actually solidly locked into your body. Your defense system ensures you're not going to get rid of your good blood vessels with food, but those extra blood vessels tend to be fragile, and those are the ones that the foods that we eat, and then if necessary, drugs that we can prescribe can really just kind of shear those extra vessels away.
Yeah, this whole sort of field of angiogenesis and blood vessels, I think, is going to be fascinating for people, because I think many people, everyone's aware that they've got blood vessels inside them. I think a lot of people will think, I sort of learned this in biology at school, that there's the heart and the blood vessels, it pumps oxygen around the body. That's how oxygen gets to all my muscles and organs. But potentially it kind of ends there. Like, it doesn't go beyond that. And what I love about that explanation is when angiogenesis is not working well, we're not able to make new blood vessels where we need to, it can cause a whole multitude of different diseases. But also when it's kind of out of control or gets to these cancer cells, too much angiogenesis can cause problems. And therefore the question for me, Dr. Lee, is, if angiogenesis sits at the heart of multiple different conditions, so we can look at it as a root cause, we also say similar things about chronic unresolved inflammation, don't we? We talk about inflammation being a root cause of lots of these chronic diseases. So can you speak a little bit about the relationship between inflammation and angiogenesis? Because it strikes me that they can't be separate. They probably sit side by side together in most cases.
Yeah, no, it's such a great question. I actually worked on research exactly looking at that interrelationship. So
Wow.
we know, well, let's take a look at just sort of something everybody recognizes, and to show how inflammation and blood vessel growth go hand in hand. If you are in the kitchen and you accidentally cut you're cutting a piece of fruit and you accidentally cut your finger or cut your hand, what's going to happen? It's going to bleed. All right. Now, so you're going to stop the bleeding. Then a few minutes later, you look at the cut. What's going to happen? It's swollen. It's puffy. It's red because inflammation's actually gotten there. Your immune defenses have sent these inflammatory cells. These are kind of super soldiers from our immune system that go there to kind of clean up and prevent any bacteria from rushing into that site. And then shortly thereafter, within a day or so, new blood vessels start growing because the inflammatory cells, the cells from your immune system, started to release some signals to say, hey, you know what? We've cleaned up. It's time to reset the table. And so now blood vessels actually start to grow into it. So inflammation sends the signals for wound healing, that for blood vessels to grow. By the same token, inflammation then goes away, which is why our wounds don't stay puffy the whole time. The puffy and redness goes away. The blood vessels grow, you get a scab, and before long, you're back to normal. And that's because both inflammation is turned down, turned off, like that's that car volume of the car radio, and also angiogenesis, once you get enough, it stops. And so this is getting back to that set point. Now, what happens when you actually have chronic anything? Usually it's not a good result. So inflammation being really good, a little bit is really good. So, I think a lot of people misunderstand. Like, I want to get rid of all the inflammation in my body. No, you don't, because you want the ability of your body to be able to mount small amounts of inflammation when needed for a short period of time and then to go away. All right. That's you want that. That's life-saving. But what you don't want is for that inflammation to get there and the volume to keep turning up, or that it never gets turned back down. That's chronic inflammation, and that's abnormal. So your body, this whole idea of turning up and then turning down the volume for inflammation, if you can't turn it down, the inflammation continues to smolder in your body. An example I've given is sort of like for anybody who's listening who's enjoyed going camping.
Yeah.
You go into woods, you set up a tent, it gets cold at night. What do? You build a campfire. And that's like a little bit of inflammation, gives you warmth that serves its purpose. And, when it's time to go to bed, you either let it burn down and you just, make sure that it's all walled off and you're fine. But that fire, if it doesn't burn down, but actually spills out and catches the forest on fire, now you actually got a problem, because now this thing is going out of control. And diseases with chronic inflammation, like lupus, like rheumatoid arthritis, like diabetes, frankly, you wind up actually having this chronic inflammatory state that starts to provoke all kinds of other things. And remember, we talked about tumors and angiogenesis. Well, if a tumor is kind of like a wound, it can hijack blood vessels, and you got inflammation, and now the cancer itself causes some inflammation, you're just making it a hell of a lot easier for that tumor to get a blood supply, which means that the cancer is more likely to grow. And in fact, we do see this in patients who are actually chronically inflamed. We know that inflammation is one of those hallmarks for people who develop cancer.
One of the things I really liked about your approach was you said, well, let's put into our body foods that support these 5 defense systems. And if we can do that and support them, we raise the bar, we become more resilient. Therefore, we've got more headroom to actually deal with the insults that are going to come in life, whether that's DNA insults from pollution, or whether it's the odd thing that we creep into our diet that we probably know isn't the best thing for us, but we just fancy it now and again. And I really like that approach. And I know we're starting off this conversation focusing on some of the things to avoid. We're very quickly going to get onto the things that people can put in. But yeah, I really, really appreciate that.
The most important thing that we as doctors can do is to listen to our patients and hear them out and try to understand where they're coming from and what's important to them. I always ask my patients, what do you eat? What do you like to eat? What brings you joy when it comes to food? Though that question usually can elicit an answer. Like I'm very careful not to ask that question judgmentally. What kind of negative foods how much for steak do you eat? Like I never ask that. I always sort of say, like, tell me about what do you enjoy eating? What brings you joy? What are some of the favorite things that you like to eat? And, again, it's that conversation that invites someone to look deeply within them. I think that, when I was a kid, I studied martial arts, and one of the greatest martial artists ever was Bruce Lee, who I actually read a lot of his writings. He wrote in a philosophical sort of way, and he wrote one of the most important things that if to succeed in life, whether it's martial arts or otherwise, is to know yourself, to truly know yourself. And I think that so often we get distracted. We don't have that opportunity to ask ourselves something simple like, so if we had a choice, what would we want to eat? What brings us joy? And my strong belief is if we want people to get on a better diet, to get them started and to keep them going on it, we want them to actually feel like it's not a heavy lift. It's something that's doable. And I think there's nothing easier than to say, hey, you know what? Something that you already brings you pleasure and joy, something you enjoy to eat already is healthy. So let's start with those things because you already know you love them. So in my book, Eat to Beat Disease, I have lists of like 200 some foods. I always tell people, have my book, get a Sharpie. Okay. I say a Sharpie, like the marker, permanent marker, because it's permanent. You have to make a commitment. All right. Take a Sharpie, a black Sharpie, and circle the foods that you enlist that you already like. No, actually that you love. All right. And I don't care if it's just one or two. Almost everyone I've met has been able to circle like 10 of them. Or more. But if you find a food that you already love, that's healthy and good for you, that activates your health defenses, you are already way ahead of the game.
We'll be back to the conversation in just a moment. Now, many of us struggle to find time to eat all of these incredible whole foods. That's why I'm a big fan of good quality whole food supplements like this one that's been in my own life for over 3 years now. It contains over 75 whole food source ingredients, vitamins, minerals, pre and probiotics, and it can help us support our energy, focus, digestion, and our immune system. Athletic Greens are giving my audience a fantastic offer. 1 year's free supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first order. You can see all the details at athleticgreens.com/live more or simply click on the link below. Now, back to the conversation. Love that. Very empowering approach to people. Oils. Oils are something that can cause a lot of confusion. I know you're a big fan of olive oil. I want to talk about olive oil and why it's so beneficial. But before we get to olive oil, in the spirit of the kind of foods that we should think about limiting when we are in our supermarket or our grocery store, and we're looking around to purchase oils to cook food in, to sprinkle on food, to pour on our salads, what kind of oils should we try and avoid? And then what sort of oil should we try and buy instead?
So this, like the debate about artificial sweeteners, is a loaded topic. And so I want to just start, this component of our conversation by saying the jury is still very much deliberating what oils are harmful to you and are most harmful to you. But I think that it's less controversial what oils are better for you and good for you. I want to, for your listeners, I want to kind of give people some real practical things and not just kind of dive into the science of petroleum products, which is what oils are. Let's talk about this. Rule number one, regardless of what oil you actually have, what I would say is don't have too much of it because oils are fats and fats can be healthier, but there really isn't such a thing as a healthy fat that you should like drink lots of it every single day. Okay. So the point is that there are healthier oils, but we should all limit the amount of oil that we actually intake into our body. All right. Number one. Number two is that, and this is actually broadly speaking, is don't reuse your oil. Okay. Most oils that are reused, when we heat them to cook, whether we're actually, I mean, again, deep frying is generally something that's not very healthy. The process of deep frying actually changes the natural chemicals that make up oil in the oil itself, and then paint it onto the food, stick it onto the food. So we're eating some of the changed chemicals when we actually eat deep fried food. Now, look, I mean, I've had some awesome fish and chips when I visited England before. And again, as we talked about, every now and then, if you spend most of your time shoring up your health defenses, raising your own bar, having a rare treat is totally fine. But when you fry things in hot oil, you're also changing the chemical structure of things. That entire browning, golden browning, crisping of food actually changes the chemical structure of the food itself, and in ways that are potentially carcinogenic. And so just need to be careful about that. The third, so I think, like reusing oil, here's the thing that's kind of like a little risky. You go to a restaurant to eat, you have no idea if they're reusing their oil over and over and over again. I mean, think about in Asian restaurants, whether it's an Indian restaurant or a Chinese restaurant, they've got these gigantic vats where they're frying tasty little bits up, but they may be reusing that oil for days. So reused oil, not good for you, for sure. And the stuff that's fried in oil can also change in time. So let's start now talking about just like the properties of oils themselves. This is where I think, rather than kind of walk into the quicksand of trying to say, is palm oil better than corn oil? Is coconut oil dangerous for you? Like we can wade into that jungle with, but I think you need a machete to cut your way out of it. And so the best way to think about it, to help give clarity is, are there any healthier oils to use and how to use them? And this is where I think olive oil really stands out. Number one, it's part of a healthy pattern of eating that's been revered for thousands of years. And that's in the traditional Mediterranean diet. And the olives are seasonal, they're pressed. The extra virgin olive oil contains not just fat, and monounsaturated fatty acids, which are better for your body and less damaging for your cardiovascular health. But there's a lot of polyphenols that come from the olive itself. Now, a lot of people don't understand this, but when you look at olive oil, the reason we say extra virgin olive oil, EVOO, that's what supermarkets and what restaurants are proud to use now, is because it's not just fat. It contains the polyphenols from the oil. So if you were to actually, by the way, this is a good experiment to do for your listeners, buy a little container of olives from your grocery store, de-pitted, make it easy for yourself. And literally, take it home and take a heavy glass, or take a board, like a heavy cutting board, and press those olives yourself. And you'll actually see, if you press hard enough, you'll see some oil come out of it. Now, in an olive oil factory, I mean, that's so you can actually appreciate where your food comes from, where your olive oil comes from. Now, when you actually press it, you'll see that you've crushed the olives. And some of the bits from the olives are actually in the olive oil. The reason that olive oil tastes so good, it's got that, kind of peppery, vegetal kind of quality to it. It's got an umami flavor. It's not because the fat is flavorful. It's because the bits of olives that were crushed in there are actually in there flavoring it. Now, those bits and the stuff that comes from the meat of the olives contain the polyphenols, one of which is hydroxytyrosol. Hydroxytyrosol sounds like a very complicated chemical name. Your listeners don't need to memorize it by any means, but you should know that comes from the olive. Now, olive oil will have some of it, only about 20% of it. But if you actually press that olive, 80% goes into the olive water, and it's stuck in the pulp. And so one of the things that I always say is that, if you really love olive oil and you want to get the most out of it, just eat the whole olive, and you can actually cut up an olive and you'll get a little bit of fat, you'll get all that flavor, and you'll get a lot more of the polyphenol. Now, if you're going to cook with olive oil, I always say go for extra virgin because of that reason. I would say don't deep fry, but you can you can put some on to food. You can actually saute with it, not too much. All the studies show that about 3 tablespoons of olive oil, sort of like what you probably, that's around the max of what you'd want a day. So nobody's drinking olive oil. And then the other thing that is, if you want to choose which olive oil, because I get overwhelmed when I walk into a store and I see all these, like a whole wall full of olive oils, right? Everybody's marketing. Here's what I do again. I pick up the olive and oil and I look at the ingredients. What do I look for? I look for monovarietal olive oil. Monovarietal means it's made with just one kind of olive. And I look for the one kind of olive that oil is made from 3 different varieties of olive. In Spain, Spanish olive oil, I look for Picual, Picual. Picual olives, among the highest in polyphenols in the oil. So the olive oil will be loaded. Second, Greek olive oil, the Koroneiki olive, which is from the Peloponnesus. Both the Picual and Koroneiki are very common olives, so that's a good news. It's not very expensive. Highest amount of one of the top 3 polyphenols. And the third, for Italian olive oil, I look for oil that's been pressed from a monovarietal called Moraiolo, and that comes from Umbria. And that's less common, harder to find, a little pricier. But I just gave you 3 olives, Picual, Koroneiki, Moraiolo, that are not, most of them are not good eating olives, but they're great for olive oil. They're packed with polyphenols. If you get olive oil that is monovarietal, pressed only from each of those, you can be guaranteed that you're getting sort of the capo de capo of the polyphenols in the olive oil.
Yeah, I love that. I actually, in my kitchen, as we speak now, is the Picual olive. It's, well, I would have called it a single origin, but that's because I'm probably used to picking coffee. But as you were describing that, there was such a wonderful energy in your voice and your body language. It reminded me of like a wine connoisseur talking about the different varieties of wines, or a coffee connoisseur talking about that, you know, I get the single origin bean from this particular farm. But I guess it's not that different, is it? It's about going back to, where does this come from? How was it processed? What is actually in my hand right now that I'm about to buy?
Yeah, and you know, there is great pride that we as humans have always had, and it's still within us, to know something about the food that is around us. I mean, you know, if you talk to a farmer, they are proud of what they have. If you talk to a villager, they're really proud of what grows around their community. And again, I think that, you know, something that maybe that we're fighting against, because I want to draw back the jargon that you raised at the beginning, that I think is helpful to think about. What are we really fighting against? You know, I think we're fighting against our distraction from ourselves, getting to know who we are, and getting to know, slowing down so we can actually understand our own pace. We're getting distracted by the pace of what we're expected to do, and so we've got no time for ourselves, right? I mean, every young working parent certainly feels that way. Mm-hmm. You know, like, man, I'm so busy, I don't have time for myself. And yet, when it comes to food and health, we all need to have that time for ourselves. And I think we should take great pride in saying what it is that we actually love.
Yeah. A lot of people talk about the health properties of vegetables. Of course, you promote all kinds of vegetables which have different impacts on the body. But some of the time we're told to sprinkle or pour some olive oil onto the vegetables because it helps us absorb nutrients from them. What's your perspective on that, in view of what you've just said about oil and, you know, perhaps not over consuming it, even though it can be healthy?
Yeah, well, let's unpack that, because there's 2 things that you were describing. One is that in plants, let's take a tomato as a great example. There are natural substances, natural chemicals, like lycopene. Lycopene is a carotenoid. It helps to make the tomato red. It has lots and lots of healthful properties. It's a powerful antioxidant. I've studied lycopene in a laboratory, and it actually can help starve cancers by cutting off the blood supply. It can slow the shortening of telomeres to slow cellular aging, and it can actually protect our DNA from even sunlight and ultraviolet exposure. Lots of good things about it. Now, lycopene actually is a naturally occurs in a tomato on a vine in a chemical form that our body doesn't absorb that well. So if you pick a tomato off the vine and you cut it up and you throw it into a salad, it might taste great. Just got some vitamin C in it. It's a great source of hydration and great flavors. Okay, especially if it's like a homegrown heirloom type of tomato. But you're not going to get you're not going to get as much lycopene. You're probably only going to get maybe 20% of the lycopene that's in there. But you want to, like for me, I want to get as much of the good stuff as I can. So here's what research has found. If you wanted to convert that chemical structure of lycopene into a form that you can absorb better, your body can avidly absorb, what you want to do is you want to heat the tomato like in a pan, and with the heat will change the chemical structure from a form your body doesn't absorb that well into a form that your body avidly absorbs, loves to absorb it. Now you go from 20% absorption to 80% absorption. You flipped it around completely, upended that equation completely. Now you're really absorbing it. Now, here's one additional thing though. How would you heat a tomato in a pan? You heat it in water or nothing? No, not really. You put a little bit of olive oil in it. And why is that? And it's because lycopene is a substance that we call fat soluble. It's a lipid. It loves to dissolve into fats. So a little bit of olive oil in tomatoes on a pan, sauteed, so it's soft, change the chemical structure. Flavors are really great now. And you have that. Now when you eat that tomato sauce, sauteed in olive oil, the olive oil with the lycopene is carried into your body even more efficiently than if it were cooked in water. And so again, that's just one example of thousands of how oils with fat soluble foods. By the way, if you didn't want to look at olive oil, here's another common snack in the United States anyways, kind of tearing a page book from Latin American cuisine. You have these tortilla chips and then you wind up actually having a salsa and guacamole. The salsa is often sort of stewed down tomatoes, cooked down tomatoes, served room temperature or chilled. And then the guacamole is just avocado that's been smashed up. Now, avocado has a lot of healthy fats in it. It's a fat soluble veggie. It's actually quite nutritious. Remarkably, people eating avocado actually shrink their waistline because actually, even though they're eating fat, it actually it burns down harmful fat. It's a whole other story that we had. But if you have guacamole, avocado with tomatoes, you get more lycopene. And so that happens to be kind of a popular snack in the United States.
Yeah, I love that. So the right combination of foods can actually help absorb the nutrients. I think black pepper also can do that, right? With certain nutrients.
Well, right. So black pepper so this is an interesting thing. Most of us have heard that turmeric, which is a kind of a root, when you cut it open, it's this bright, beautiful, bright orange, a lovely color. And turmeric is also a dried spice used in Southeast Asian cuisine, including Indian cuisine, is where I first became acquainted with it. It not only makes food beautiful, it actually makes food delicious. It's got quite a lovely taste to it. It's a spice. Inside turmeric is curcumin. Curcumin is one of those natural chemicals, kind of like lycopene. It's one of those Mother Nature's treasure chest, Mother Nature's pharmacy with an F, not a PH. And the curcumin has a lot of properties: anti-inflammatory, it's antioxidant, it cuts off the blood supply feeding cancers. It actually is helpful for your stem cells as well. It really activates almost all of your body's health defenses, and it's good for your gut microbiome. So why not just, enjoy turmeric as a spice by itself? Because it's so potent that our body actually doesn't absorb everything that it could. In fact, our body kind of gets, a lot of it gets flushed out, at the tail end. And so what we want to do to improve our body's extraction of the good stuff, the turmeric, it turns out that if you have fresh cracked black pepper, all right, there's a substance in fresh cracked black pepper called piperine. Yeah. Piperine is one of Mother Nature's, again, these remarkable chemicals that actually influences the body. And piperine helps the body hang on to the curcumin. So if you have fresh cracked black pepper with your turmeric, you're actually creating a 1-2 punch that allows you to absorb more of the curcumin.
Yeah, I love that. So the right combinations can actually help us get more out of these incredible whole foods. But I think the wrong combinations potentially can also make certain foods less beneficial. One example I've heard you talk about before is what happens when you put milk into tea. I know you're a big fan of tea. On the last conversation, you spoke about a lot of the benefits of tea. But I think I've heard you say that if you add milk to your tea, that actually you reduce some of the beneficial effects. Is that right?
You know, those scientists that do television shows to actually make science accessible to people. This is kind of where we need to go with this topic. So look, tea, green tea, especially, has a natural polyphenol that's called catechins, EGCG, epigallocatechin gallate, EGCG, and the catechin is actually just part of the natural substance in the tea leaf. So whether you're brewing tea with a bag, or whether it's loose leaf tea, or whether it's matcha, which is just powdered tea leaves. The fact of the matter is that into the brew, into the liquid, the hot liquid, comes all these phytochemicals, including these catechins. So when you sip straight tea, the catechins go right in. They're easily absorbed by your body. And so, you know, our blood levels of catechins go way up. So many things that catechins can do. One of the things that's important is actually it's a relaxant. It actually helps lower your stress. It lowers the catecholamines. And so other things, it helps your lipids. It actually also helps fight cancer. It's anti-inflammatory, kind of like curcumin. It's a substance that has so many beneficial things that, at least when I drink tea, I want to get as much as I can out of my food. All right. Now, I deeply respect traditions of eating and drinking. And one of the things that, I know is a tradition in England is, you put, or in Ireland, you actually put some milk or cream into your tea. It actually changes the flavor profile, and it's lovely. I've had plenty of teas in England before, and I find it to be just such an incredibly nice. I feel great, sort of like having an English tea. Put dairy in it. Here's what you need to know. Dairy, and I'm talking about cow dairy, right? So not nut milk. This applies to cow dairy. We'll come back to the nut milk in a second. Cow dairy, okay, actually is fat. Milk has got fat in it, like butter, which is made out of milk. And the fat, when you put it into your tea, does change its flavor, but that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about the fact that when milk or cream is put into tea, the fat molecules in the cow dairy form little soap bubbles. These are microscopic soap bubbles. They're called micelles. Fat likes to stick with fat. And so tea is mostly water. And so when you pour milk into tea, the bubbles, the dairy fat sticks together and makes a little tiny soap bubble. And what does it do? Those soap bubbles trap the polyphenols from tea. It traps the catechin. So you've got some good stuff wrapped in a soap bubble of dairy. And now when you drink the tea, the catechin is trapped in the soap bubble. It doesn't get absorbed as easily in your stomach, and it just rolls down your gut, and a lot of it comes out the other end. Okay. And so you're missing out on a lot of the good stuff. You get a great, you get a nice flavor. And so I have, what I'm telling you is that if you're drinking milk, or cow milk, dairy, put it in your tea, you're getting good flavor if that's what you like, but you're missing out on all as most of the polyphenols. So just be aware that that's what you're actually doing. Now, if you want to actually still cut the tea with something that is milk-like, nut milks are fine because they don't actually have the same fatty reaction that the cow dairy has. So almond milk, cashew milk, those soy milk, they're all fine.
I mean, that's really interesting. And I like the way you frame it with this deep respect for cultures and traditions, because I hear that. And I think for someone who might be listening or watching this, and they think, yeah, but you know what? It's just a part of what I do. Like I love putting milk in my black tea, or I know some people even put it in their green tea, which I certainly haven't tried before. They might hear that and they may not want to change what they do. But is this where potentially supplements could come in? Let's say they like the taste of milky tea, but they hear that and think, well, I want all those benefits, so those polyphenols and the catechins that Dr. Lee was talking about. Maybe I can boost that another way by taking a supplement. Is there any merit to that way of thinking? And I guess you could expand that broadly into what is your view of, supplements as a whole huge category, but there are some really good quality supplements out there. Perhaps you could speak to those issues a little bit, please.
Yeah. Well, let's pick up the thread on tea for a second, because I had this discovery that might be useful for your listeners who are in exactly that situation where they like the taste of milk in their tea. I discovered there is something called milk tea, and it's actually from Taiwan. It's grown in the mountain, and it's just pure tea leaves that when you brew it, it tastes like it's got dairy in it.
Oh, wow.
It's quite amazing. I mean, if I made a cup of that for you and then made a cup of English tea with milk in it, you would have a hard time telling the difference. It's quite remarkable. Milk tea. It's I think it's an oolong style tea. So it's mildly fermented and still got green properties. It's got polyphenols in it, but it has to do with the climate, the way that it's naturally grown and the type of tea it is. So, all right. So let's move that aside for a second. All right. Well, so what about supplements? I think that we should look to the word itself. A dietary supplement means something to top off. So I always tell people, if you have a choice of getting it from the whole food, the whole food will tend to have a lot of other stuff that's good for you. If you eat whole plant-based foods, for example, you get the fiber, you get the polyphenols, you get a lot of other chemical substances, you get the natural peptides that are found in foods. That if you got a pure supplement, you might get the one molecule or two molecules that it's been created for, like a vitamin C supplement. If you want to top off your vitamin C, it's pure vitamin C. You're going to get a lot of it if you take a vitamin. But if you had citrus, you're going to get all of that flavor. You're going to get a different kind of flavor. You get some. You do get sugar. You get fiber. You get the limonene and all these other hesperidin, all these other bioactives that you can't get from a regular supplement alone. That said, you are absolutely right. Supplements can be really important, particularly for people who have difficulty getting a lot of some nutrients or their food. So for example, I think omega-3 fatty acids are a great supplement if you get a high quality omega-3. Not everybody eats oily fish, day in, 2 to 3 times a week. You only need to eat the amount in each serving with the size of a deck of playing cards. So you don't need to eat very much. But, that's not something most people do. People who live on the coastline, they might be doing it, but many people don't. So omega-3s are so important to our health. I mean, this has been shown time and time and again. That's a supplement that's definitely worth taking, and it's a lot easier to swallow omega-3s than it is actually to go to your fishmonger and then to look at what the catch of the day is. That's an example. Another example of a supplement I think is really worth taking is probably vitamin D3. Yeah. Okay. Vitamin D, for those of us who live in the northern hemisphere where we don't have as much sun all the time, all year round, and where it's cold, so we're indoors a lot and not always outdoors under the sunshine. So I'm not talking Costa del Sol. I'm not talking about South Africa, or Australia. I'm talking about, England, Northern Europe, North America, and sort of the northeastern side. Okay. We don't get as much sunlight. And even if we do go outside, because it's cold, we wear a lot of clothes. And so our skin tends to be covered up. And so vitamin D is made by our skin when sunlight actually hits it. And so we tend to be vitamin D deficient. So here's an example of where you can eat foods like mushrooms that can have vitamin D, for example. By the way, I don't know if this is a little tidbit for you. I just told you that human skin with ultraviolet radiation from the sun will make more vitamin D. But did you know that if you took just a plain old lowly white button mushroom that contains some vitamin D, if you were to, before you eat it, when you buy it, if you slice it pretty thinly, and you lay the slices out and you put it in your windowsill, so the sun shines on the slice, it will make more vitamin D.
Wow.
You will actually convert more vitamin D into the mushroom. So if you're going to prepare something with mushrooms, slice them ahead of time, stick them in front of a sunny window, no matter what time of the year it is, maybe a couple hours before you cook with it, and the mushrooms will actually give you more vitamin D. But it's a lot easier to get your regular dose of daily vitamin D by actually just having D3 supplements.
I want to get into some specific foods later on in this conversation, but just to sort of tease people, as it were, right at the start, are there a couple of kind of facts about some specific foods that you think would be surprising for people that a lot of people may not be aware of?
Yeah, well, first of all, there's a lot of mythology about foods, and some of it's wrong. And when I say myth, I'm referring to urban legends. So, as a bit of a teaser, most people, most women have heard that soy should be avoided because it's dangerous. So, eating soy can increase your risk for breast cancer. That is a common thought, but it's completely false. It is an urban legend. Research actually shows that those women who are at highest risk, including women who have breast cancer, the more soy they eat, the lower their chances of death. And so that's an example of an eye-opening fact that science brings to the table about soy. Here's another one. Many people have heard that tomatoes should be avoided because they're a member of the nightshade family, which is poisonous, and that tomatoes contain a deadly toxin called lectins that should be avoided, and it causes inflammation in the body. Well, that's also completely wrong. There are thousands of lectins out there. Tomatoes happen to have some of the non-toxic ones. And in fact, the studies of tomatoes have actually shown in more than 30,000 people that those men who eat just 2 to 3 servings of cooked tomatoes a week have a 30% lower risk of developing prostate cancer. And so again, 2 examples of common foods that are surrounded by urban modern mythology that science cuts through like a hot knife through butter in order to reveal what the true health benefits could be.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And yeah, later on in this conversation, I'd love to get into some more specifics around particular foods. But I think at the start here, just to sort of set the scene, one of the things that really struck me about your approach is, how you look at health and disease. So many of us, I'm a medical doctor. I trained in the 90s in Edinburgh Medical School. We're trained how to diagnose disease and then treat it. And sometimes we talk about preventing disease in the future. But you sort of reframed that slightly, didn't you, to sort of ask yourself, well, why is it that we're not getting sick more often? And I think that's a really beautiful, it's a subtle distinction, but it's such a beautiful way of looking at the human body. So can you tell me a little bit about, why did you frame it that way? And by doing so, what answers did you get that can help us all with our health and well-being?
Yeah, so like yourself, during my education and training in medicine, we're all responsible for digesting about 4,000 years of Western medical knowledge in a few years. And then to be able to, in short order, turn that around into everyday practice for our patients, right? So that's a tall order just to begin with. And most of it is about learning how to diagnose diseases accurately, as accurately as possible, and then coming up with essentially a textbook solution. I mean, that's what we're taught to do from the very beginning. Recognize the disease, recognize the solution, try to match them up, and then actually deliver that as something that we can use to help our patients. And I did that for many, many years. And in fact, I was so inspired by the unmet needs for treating diseases, some diseases successfully, like cancer, like diabetes, like blindness, frankly. I wound up actually starting a nonprofit organization called the Angiogenesis Foundation. It's a charity where we, as a third party, set out to develop better treatments for all of these, unbeatable diseases, looking for their disease common denominator. And I'm going to come back to common denominator in a second. I felt that although, billions of dollars have been spent towards cancer research or research to prevent blindness, as just 2 different examples, or breast cancer or Alzheimer's disease, progress in science was formidable, but progress in treatment was way too slow. And my thought was that if we could actually look at what makes diseases common and similar to one another, rather than appreciate only what makes them different from one another. So as a researcher, we tend to take a study, a field of study, an inch wide, and then dive a mile deep into exploring it. What I wanted to do was to really upend that idea to say, well, maybe what we should do is take a look at many diseases and see what the common threads are. Because if we could find that common thread, we might be able to pull the bow back and send a single arrow more efficiently through multiple diseases to have an economy of scale of impact. Okay, so when I did that, we wound up becoming enormously successful. I've been involved with 41, about to be 42 FDA approved treatments for cancer, complications of diabetes and vision loss. And with that kind of success, one of the things that it made me realize was the power of science to generate evidence that something works. And the other thing that I realized is that treating disease was highly valuable, but really misses the mark of preventing the disease in the first place. Because if all we do as a sort of in our medical world is invent new things to throw at old diseases in this never-ending progression, then we're chasing really the tail of a beast that we'll never catch. And I wanted to be able to actually figure out how to, prevent the problem in the first place. Now, a short story about what actually happened that sparked me towards nutrition is I was a doctor for many years in a veterans hospital. This is a hospital in the U.S. that takes care of people who are former soldiers. And, as a payback for their service, they can come to a medical center and receive essentially free care. And I felt compelled, a duty, actually, when I finished my training to be able to pay back the people who helped to support and defend the country. And so I took on a stint at a veterans hospital. These were some of my favorite patients. They were grateful. They had rich lives. They had amazing stories to tell, and they were just nice people. And unfortunately, though, they were pretty sick. So most of the people that I saw were in their 60s and 70s and 80s were terribly obese. They had diabetes, heart disease, cancer, respiratory illnesses, you name it. They had these terrible problems. And the thing that struck me, that, because here I was writing prescriptions and sending people to specialists and having them have surgery and all these other interventions. And I was very excited, actually, at the very beginning to be able to let them know some of the treatments that I myself had been involved with helping to develop. But what I realized that was the irony is that these soldiers who were so terribly out of shape in the latter part of their lives were once cut, fit, buff physical specimens that couldn't have even served in the military unless they were in perfect shape. And so I had to ask myself, what the hell happened to these people? Yeah. They were in great shape and now they're in terrible shape. And that's what led me on sort of this odyssey to think back about what what kept them from being sick in the early days, and then what actually happened to their bodies that led them to deteriorate. And that's where I came back to this the health defenses that are hardwired in our body. Because like soldiers like they were, they once were the defenders of the country, but as they got older, their ability to defend actually waned. And so too in our body, I realized there's these biological systems that keep us fit, keep us healthy. And if we're not careful to take good care of them, they too will wane in their power to defend us. And that's actually how we wind up getting sick.
Yeah, it's very powerful what you just shared about the Veterans Hospital, because I think, although that's in the latter stages of their life, I'm sure there's many people listening to this right now or watching this who would have resonated with that on some level and thought, hey, you know what, when I was at school, I used to swim, or, maybe I was on the college or the university squash team or the tennis team. And now in my middle age, I've got a bit of extra weight. I don't have as much energy. So, it's on a continuum, isn't it? And of course, the end of that continuum, that's where we tend to get involved as medical doctors, Western medical doctors at least. And we say, oh, you have this disease now. But actually, I think that's a very powerful way of just showing gradually, without us realizing, as we're getting on with our daily lives, our health can be deteriorating bit by bit. In terms of these defense systems, you also mentioned at the start of this conversation the word resilience, and how what you try and do, or certainly food when used as medicine, can really help us with that resilience. Perhaps could you take us through these defense systems that you've learned about? Because I know you've identified 5 of them. I think that would be really interesting for my audience, what those are. And then I think we'll get to, well, what can we actually do about each and every single one?
Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit about resilience first before I talk about the health defenses. So think about how resilient the human body is, right? I mean, we can take a punch and we can get back up on our feet pretty easily throughout most of our lives. Our body knows how to heal. So if you wind up getting a cold, you tend to recover from it. If you get a cut on your skin, it tends to heal up. If our belly gets upset and we wind up, feeling we're in a toilet in ways that are not comfortable for us, we'll generally rebound back to our normal health. I mean, that's really most of the experiences that we have as we're younger. And that resilience actually is quite an amazing thing because it has to do with this concept that we learn as doctors, which is homeostasis. Our body wants to stay in a homeostatic position. And that means like a gyroscope, or like a big ocean liner, sailing through, rough seas. There is kind of a set point that no matter how big the waves are, we tend to kind of stay set. Our center of gravity is where everything wants to get back to. And that is actually critical health. Now, what's the gyroscopes of our health? How do we actually maintain our balance? How do we veer off to the side, but rebound back to that center point, our own center of gravity? And that's where these health defenses actually come into play. So our health defenses, which I'm going to tell you the 5 of them in a moment, actually started to be developed in our bodies when we were still in our mom's womb. So when our mom's egg met our dad's sperm and fertilized in the womb, within about 4 or 5 days, these cells, primitive cells and stem cells, wound up forming our organs, our circulation, our hearts, our brains, our noses, our hands, our feet, our bones. And along the way, at the same time, our body formed these remarkable defenses. Now, these defenses are designed to protect our bodies the same way that in a European fortress, a medieval fortress, there are these defenses, right?
Yeah.
You have the moat. You actually have the drawbridge. You have those arrow slits that you can shoot out of. You've got the curved wall. All these defenses that you find in a castle, there is a counterpart in our body. And in our body, our defenses to keep us healthy and resist disease and help us maintain resilience are the following. Number 1, we have a defense called angiogenesis. Angiogenesis, 2 words. It's actually 1 word, but it's 2 component parts of it. Angio meaning blood or blood vessels, genesis meaning growth. So it's how our body grows blood vessels, our circulation. And the reason blood vessels are a defense system is because we've got 60,000 miles worth of blood vessels packed into the average adult body.
Wow.
And these are the highways and byways that deliver blood, oxygen that we breathe, and the nutrients from the food we eat to every single cell and organ. And if we don't have enough of these blood vessels, our tissues, our organs starve. And many times they'll die. So our body needs to be able to maintain enough blood vessels, enough circulation. And on the other hand, if we've got too many blood vessels and overgrowth, that would be like a garden that overgrows with weeds. Those weeds actually obscure the function of the garden, and they can actually destroy our health by feeding diseases. Extra blood vessels can feed diseases like cancer, as an example, or arthritis or psoriasis, or many other types of harmful extra unwanted blood vessels. And so the body maintains its resilience in circulation by literally maintaining a balance, this set point, this gyroscope, center of gravity. And the way that I tell people, it's kind of like the old fairy tale Goldilocks. So not too many blood vessels, not too few blood vessels, but just right, like the 3 bears.
Yeah.
Not too hard, not too soft, not too hot, not too cold, just right. This is a paradigm that follows all the health defenses. So blood vessels are one of them. Secondly are our stem cells. Remember I said that we formed in a womb with stem cells?
Yeah.
Well, when we're born, we have extra stem cells left over that were not used. So it's kind of like painting a room. if you're painting a room and you're going to buy paint, right? You always buy extra paint because the last thing you want to do is to run out of paint before you finish the job. What do you do when the room has been completed from painting? You've got extra cans of paint. So what do? You put the cap on, you put it in your garage, okay, for another time if you need to spot check. Well, this is actually what happens with our stem cells. When we're born, and our organs have formed all these stem cells, the overage, and we've got extra stem cells. In fact, we've got 750 million extra stem cells when we're born. That gets packed up into our bone marrow, where it basically sits for most of our lives until we need to repair our organs from the inside out. So regeneration, our ability to be able to renew ourselves, is another health defense system. A third one is our gut. Our gut microbiome. So much has been made of how important our gut bacteria is. I will tell you, we're just scratching the tip of the iceberg of understanding our gut bacteria, but I will tell you it is so important that we've got about roughly the same number of bacteria growing inside our body as we actually have human cells. Yeah. And beyond bacteria, there's even viruses that are healthy viruses. I just learned this the other day. We've got about 39 trillion bacteria growing inside our body. Most of them are healthy. And as you know, when we were in medical school, we were all taught, we drank the Kool-Aid that bacteria are bad. And so one must destroy bacteria. And hence there are antibiotics to match with bacteria. But in fact, most bacteria in our bodies are good. And occasionally there is a bad actor that kind of springs out. And so but what I learned was that there are good viruses as well. In fact, there are 10 times more viruses in and on the body than bacteria. Yeah. So it's 380 trillion viruses, the human virome. Our DNA is hardwired as a fourth health defense system, hardwired to protect itself against damage from the environment, like ultraviolet radiation, radon from the ground, any chemicals or solvents we might inhale, oxidative stress, even emotional stress, which can actually fray our DNA, our genetic code. Our DNA can protect that. And of course, finally, our immune system, which like the volume switch in a car radio, is perfectly tuned to be able to deliver a little inflammation where it's needed, a lot of immune protection to be able to ward off invaders from the outside like bacteria and viruses, and invaders from the inside like cancer. And that whole system, like a volume switch on a radio, needs to be able to turn up. And when you've had enough, to turn it back down and back down to that homeostatic balancing point, that set point. And for all these health defense systems, our body kind of chugs along through life, keeping us right sort of steady as she goes. Every now and then it's got to rear up and swashbuckle to get rid of some disease, but it comes right back to center. And that's what foods can actually help to support.
Thank you for outlining those 5 powerful defense systems. There's angiogenesis, there's stem cells, there's the gut microbiome, there's DNA, and our immune system. I've got a few questions on each of them. Just to go to the fourth one, you mentioned DNA, and I think this really helps to illustrate this very fresh way you had at approaching the body, which was, why do we not get sick more often? I've heard you talk about this in the past, that actually our DNA is being damaged every single day, whether it's air pollution, whether it's, the new carpet in our house and the fumes, or the smell and the solvents in the paint, whatever it might be. And you think, yes, our DNA is being damaged, yet we're not all getting cancer. Maybe talk to me a little bit about that, because I think that really illustrates this point about our body's defense systems and this resilience that we naturally have. There's an inherent risk, isn't there, to be alive and to be human and to exist in the modern world. Yet despite that, we're still pretty robust and resilient.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. So here we are, our genetic code, we know is so important to us. And we know that when it functions properly, it makes the proteins that support our life. We also know that when our genetic code has mutations, and everyone has become familiar with this idea of mutated DNA, it tends to cause problems in our body if it can actually continue. So mutations that form actually all the time, most people don't know this, but DNA fixes these mutations silently. So we are not bothered by them. On average, a typical person has 10,000 mistakes made in their DNA every 24 hours. It's just a matter of the sheer volume of cell divisions and the machinery cranking along, chugging along. Listen, if you're in a factory, making a trillion shoes every single day, you are going to actually make a few shoes that are not going to be perfect, right? So 10,000 mistakes that get taken off the assembly line, and then the parts that are broken get fixed up, and then everything moves forward. So without even knowing it, our body is fixing itself and fixing these natural errors. Now, let's subject the body to planet Earth, right? So we're all born on this planet. We go outside. One of my favorite things is to go out on a beautiful sunny day with blue skies. I love the warmth of the sun on my skin. It just, from the time I was a kid, it made me happy, right? Well, that sunshine is ultraviolet radiation, the same ultraviolet radiation that you get when you get a sunburn on a beach, the same type of ultraviolet radiation you get in a sun tanning booth. And we know if you sunburn on a beach, or if you go to a tanning salon, you magnify your chances of developing a skin cancer because of the ultraviolet radiation mutating your DNA. Now, the same thing, by the way, and you talk about continuum, the same thing happens if you're stuck in traffic. So think about it. You're stuck on traffic on a sunny day, and here you have the sun just beaming right through your windshield, or maybe you have your window open and it's beaming on your arm. How come we don't develop skin cancer in that situation? The reason is because our body fixes any errors that is made by the ultraviolet radiation from just regular sunlight. And what happens in a sun tanning booth, or when you burn yourself repeatedly at the beach, like getting 1 or 2 sunburns, not a big deal. But when you do that repeatedly, you overwhelm the defense systems, and that's where these mutations can actually accumulate. So DNA is actually really, by the way, we talk about the genetic code. Only 3% of our DNA is actually used to make the stuff that we need for life. The rest of it are all instructions, including instructions on how to fix itself. Right. And so this idea of repair, when people hear about antioxidant foods, what they're really talking about is adding foods into your body that can assist our DNA from warding off damage, because antioxidants kind of form like a shield to neutralize the incoming missiles from these activated chemicals, reactive chemicals that can actually damage our DNA. By the same token, the foods that we eat that actually create DNA damage, because they have these chemicals that can actually generate the chemical ability to damage our DNA, our body has to fight against those as well. And so that's why we need to be mindful. As we sit down every day to make a decision about what we eat, or we go to the store to buy some food, we need to realize whatever we put into our body is either going to take our health down or build our health back up. And it all works at the level of the defense systems.
Many people these days have got, as you've already touched on, super busy, stressed out lifestyles, and they're rushing around, and they either don't have time to cook a fresh whole meal. They're often buying things on the go that probably aren't the best thing for them. They've probably got high levels of stress, so actually they're probably not even absorbing as many nutrients as they could, because their digestive system isn't in the right place to absorb those nutrients. And I found sometimes, a good quality supplement, like let's say a whole food, sometimes a green supplement, which has lots and lots of different phytochemicals, prebiotics, polyphenols in, it could be helpful. And sometimes it could be helpful in the short term to help them have more energy and feel better so that they can then make those lifestyle choices. So I know a lot of doctors take quite a hard line on supplements, but you've demonstrated some really important ones that I think have been shown in scientific studies have real benefits, like vitamin D for sure. So yeah, I really, really appreciate you.
I want to support and underscore what you just said. There's always something valuable to look at the history of things. Supplementation wasn't developed to be an online internet scam. Okay. Supplementation was a really serious effort to improve global nutrition.
Yeah.
Because back in even the early 20th century, most of the world was undernourished. That's different than malnutrition. I mean, maybe there was some malnutrition too, but undernutrition and undernourished means that, we were eating food, but we weren't eating enough of the right things at the right time. And so one of the things that supplements were developed for to do is to really fortify, supplement, top off, everyone, so that everyone could have a more equal chance of filling up, becoming replete with the key micronutrients that our body needs to actually survive. And so I think it's a mistake to disparage supplements as a category. I mean, this is the theme of what we're talking about today.
Yeah.
Let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Let's not character assassinate entire categories of things. Let's be discerning and try to know exactly what we're talking about. There are some dietary supplements that are absolutely valuable. Some that research has actually proven to be helpful, and some that can be life-saving as well. Pregnant moms really need to be taking folate. If you don't have those, you'll have neural tube defects in your babies. The risks go much higher. So you really want to be able to actually take the evidence. And so this is the other thing I think maybe a useful coat hook or hat hook to hang for your listeners is that supplements are the real deal because they were originally designed to help the body top off with what it actually needs. But if the marketing, and we're back to marketing now, sounds too good to be true, if the claims sound like they're just magical claims, that's when your spidey sense, your radar needs to go on that, maybe there's something not quite fully honest about what is being told about this, and it's being misrepresented. And so I think that every consumer needs to be able to, again, this is where I come back to, we all have mobile devices. We can easily search something. When in doubt, look it up, check it out, and then make your own decision if that fits your comfort zone.
Organic or non-organic is another topic that people find confusing. If people are able to access organic and they are able to afford it, in your view, are there any benefits to choosing that?
Right. Well, I want to just tell everyone that, first of all, I was a skeptic for many years about organic food. I thought it was marketing. I thought the food looked beautiful, was very expensive, and I thought it was mostly marketing. And the marketing message that I received as a consumer was, here's this beautiful food that's more expensive. And by the way, we don't grow it with pesticides. And so you've got less harmful chemicals on it. And it didn't feel right to me. And I had all these questions in my head about like whether or not that's really true. And what do I just wash my food a little bit more? I wasn't really sure what was real or not. Well, I changed my mind a few years ago. And I'll tell you, I was at the Royal Society in London, actually, at a really incredible meeting with horticulturalists, with astrophysicists, just a bunch of incredible scientists. And I had the privilege of sitting next to a horticulturalist, and I was talking with her about a new research paper that had come out of the journal Nature, which is a British publication, one of the premier scientific journals. And I said, I just read this paper that was really astounded me. They looked at strawberries and they were looking for the natural substance, ellagic acid, which is what makes strawberries tart. And ellagic acid is anti-inflammatory. It helps your immune system. It starves cancer. I've done research on ellagic acid myself. And so I know how powerful it is. And they were looking at strawberries, comparing organic versus conventionally grown strawberries. Another way to say that is strawberries grown with pesticides or not or no pesticides. And they were looking at ellagic acid in the strawberries. And when they measured the conventionally grown strawberries, they all had some ellagic acid. That was fine. Okay. I expected that. But then when they measured the organic strawberries, every single organic strawberry they measured had 2 times or more of the ellagic acid. And I thought that was absolutely astounding that an organically grown fruit would actually have more of that beneficial substance, that Mother Nature's kind of bioactive. And so I talked to the horticulturist and I said, okay, so help me understand why, right? So look, when you're talking to a real scientist, when scientists admit that they don't know something, right? So, and that's how anybody who says they know everything, probably not a scientist. I mean, so I literally admitted my ignorance about this, and I asked the horticulturist, "Can you help me understand why that might be?" And she gave me this answer that I've subsequently dove more deeply in, and it's absolutely true. It's true with coffee as well. Mother Nature, in part, made these bioactives like ellagic acid in strawberries, or in coffee, chlorogenic acid is another one of these. And the way that plants respond to bugs nibbling on the stems and leaves, biting at them, okay, that's the pest. Okay, might make the plant not look so nice. All right, might even mar the fruit a little bit, so it's not quite as beautiful. But the plant reacts to those little nibbles as an injury, as a wound. And in response, and a wound healing response, it produces more ellagic acid.
Yeah.
Or in the case of coffee, it makes more chlorogenic acid. So the little nibbling is part of kind of the way that evolution actually developed how plants respond to create more of these bioactives. So what happens? So why is there this difference? Well, if you actually grow a strawberry with pesticides, there's fewer bugs. The plant looks nicer. Fruit looks nicer. No bugs, no injury, less ellagic acid being made. And so all of a sudden, like this light bulb went off in my head. And this was a few years ago that I realized this, and I had this conversation. Everywhere I've looked, any research that's been done, it is true that the bioactives are higher in the organically grown plants. And that started to change my mind about organics, because the argument now is not that organics have less bad stuff. The argument is the organics have more good stuff. Now, all of a sudden, I have a different view of the nature of how this fruit is grown and what the benefits of growing without pesticides are.
Yeah, super clear explanation. Thank you for that. And then taking that one step further, which goes, I guess, beyond organic into non-organic as well. But let's take something like an apple or a carrot. Let's say a carrot, for example. There's all kinds of phytonutrients and beneficial compounds within that carrot. So what happens when we start to peel off the skin off that carrot? Because my view would be, well, a lot of the beneficial properties are in that skin, right? That's what's had to protect itself from the environment, from bugs, as you've just mentioned. So when we are peeling off that skin, yes, people may want to do it for a taste profile, I understand, but aren't we reducing how beneficial that food could be by taking off the outside?
Yeah, I'm glad you described the fact that we might want to remove the peel for aesthetic purposes, maybe for taste purposes or texture purposes. But the fact of the matter is, we know for a fact that skin does actually have good stuff. I'll give you a great example, like in an apple or a pear or a peach. Okay. Those are all fruits that, if you took the time to peel it, you'll have a more homogeneous, kind of looking piece of fruit. But most mothers will tell their kids, if you eat it with the skin, you'll get more stuff. And it's absolutely true. There's not only more fiber oftentimes in the outer layers. So you're talking about outer layers.
Yeah.
But there's also more phytonutrients and these bioactives. In apples and pears and in peaches, there is actually a substance called ursolic acid that's much more concentrated in the outer layer. And ursolic acid is one of these bioactives that stimulates blood vessel growth. It helps us heal. It stimulates angiogenesis, so that if we have an injury, our bodies will speed its healing up. That could be really important for our cardiovascular system, for example. It helps to promote the growth of blood vessels in beneficial sort of ways. Now, that's actually on the peel. So, okay, so how can you eat fruit peel? Well, look, if you had to eat 6 apricots or 6 pears or 6 peaches, that might take a little work. Or eat 6 apples. That's a good commitment to eat 6 apples, even in a day. But on the other hand, if you actually get dried fruit, the dried fruit will take a big fruit and shrink it really small. So take a look at an apricot. I might not feel like eating 6 apricots, whole apricots, from the tree, but I could easily eat 6 dried apricots, sort of in a dried fruit mix. And so again, if you want the skin, it's not just eating the fresh fruit, which you can do, but you can also get it in a dried form. Now back to the fresh for a second. This would be a good reason to buy organic as well, because when you spray with pesticides for fruits and foods with very thin skins. I mean, for carrots, there's not a skin, it's really just an outer kind of layer of the carrot. The fact of the matter is that if there's pesticides in that area, it's very hard to scrub them off. I learned, by the way, from a food safety expert at the U.S. Department of Agriculture who teaches food safety, even for a regular piece of produce, to wash all the potential pathogens, bacteria, listeria, all these other things that could happen, it's recommended that you actually rinse, whether it's organic or not, you rinse it under cold running water for 60 seconds. I did not realize that.
Wow.
That's been shown. And by the way, another thing I didn't realize is that even like an onion, you're supposed to rinse off before you actually cut it. Now, I had previously never really washed my onions. I just figured if I peel off the skin, what's underneath there is pretty clean. But then I was told, no, you should see the research. You really want to be able to wash that onion 60 seconds in cold running water. Wow. Is what you want to do. So again, back to the fruit skin, great reason to buy, good to have, good to eat, nutritious, more phytonutrients, phytochemicals. A good reason to get organic is because it's harder to wash the pesticides off of it. And dried versions of fruits are also ways of actually getting the skin as well. And that's the other reason to get, if you get dried fruit, get dried organic fruit.
Yeah. Super interesting. I'm conscious of time. There's so much I want to talk to you about. Yeah, let's go here. Autoimmune disease is on the rise massively across the world, frankly. And I'd love to hear a little bit from you about the relationship between food and the development of autoimmune disease. And I want to just add there, before you respond, that, I've been practicing now as a medical doctor for almost 21 years. And, maybe 10 years ago, as I started to really get tuned into how you might start to use food as a therapeutic tool with your patients, I've noticed that when certain patients with certain autoimmune diseases, like I can remember one clearly, this lady with hypothyroidism, she was on levothyroxine, but she still didn't feel very good at all. When I changed her diet, I helped her change to a completely whole food diet from like a standard Western diet that she was at that time consuming. Her symptoms went right down. We could halve the dose of levothyroxine, I think, within a few months. It was really incredible. So maybe, speak to that if you can a little bit about the relationship and potentially why that could have worked with that patient.
Yeah, I mean, so I've noticed this as well, over the decades of my clinical practice, that autoimmune diseases, which, by the way, let's just make sure our audience, the listeners actually appreciate this. It's not one disease. It is dozens, scores of actually different types of diseases that all share kind of a common denominator, that the autoimmune part of it is that somehow, for some reason, the immune system is triggered in ways that actually the immune response causes harm to your body itself. It's sort of the body attacking the body, or the body responding, the immune system responding in ways that causes incredible distress at the organ level, right? And so it could be lupus, it could be rheumatoid arthritis, it could be psoriasis, it could be Hashimoto's, it could be celiac. Those are some of the more common ones that people actually talk about. But in fact, there's probably a lot of autoimmune diseases that we don't even recognize yet. And a new one, by the way, which is coming down the pike, which we believed long COVID, which many, many people do have already. And I think we're going to see a whole other emergence of long COVID as a significant medical problem in the coming decade. That also seems to be autoimmune as well, where the body's immune system has overreacted or is overreacting to attack ourselves, our healthy cells. Okay, so if we're talking about a panoply of different diseases that share this common denominator, what's the role of food? Well, one thing that actually we do know, as celiac's a great example of this, gluten enteropathy, is that some foods, in the case of celiac, it's gluten, which is in wheat and whole grains, for reasons that we don't fully understand, the body sees that and just has a bad reaction. It's kind of like that, the family member that, the black sheep in the family that comes over for your family holiday gathering, and like you just don't have a good reaction to them. We all have one or two of those people in our families, and that's how your immune system kind of reacts to something in food that it just doesn't like, and it gets pissed off. And when it gets angry, it actually starts to have this reaction that makes the entire body unpleasant, just like that visitor to your home that you just don't react well to. Like, you want to stay in a different room. Well, that reaction is what autoimmune diseases are. And that's why when you talk about, the levothyroxine, just so your listeners know, like, that's actually trying to replace something that is damaged because of this reaction. You want to actually see if we can undo the damage a bit, right? And autoimmune diseases often treated with steroids. What do steroids do? They turn down the volume of the immune system. Hey, this rock music is too loud. Let's turn it. The house music's too loud. Let's turn it down a little bit. Okay, so that's what steroids do. It turns out that if you go back to look at what might be some of the root causes, increasingly we're wondering if some of these chemical additives in ultra-processed foods are actually triggering immune responses that are unintended. These are unintended consequences. And so there's a theory that in people who say that they've got gluten or celiac disease, they don't actually have full-blown celiac disease, but they're reactive, allergic, they're reactive to something that's in packaged food that also has gluten in it. And so you're sort of there are things that in these chemical laced foods that we may not fully appreciate yet. Now it goes back to what your observation with your patient is. So what happens when we take people, and there's many people who spend most of their lives eating things out of a box, right? Yeah. Out of convenience. It comes from a factory, sits on the shelf for months or years, and you change it to a whole plant-based diet, mostly plant-based, or a whole foods diet. Okay, now you're talking about not shopping in the middle aisle of the store, and I have nothing against the middle aisle. There's good treasures in there, but you're spending time in the produce, or, if you live in a village, you're going to the village market and going first to the fruit and vegetable and herb stand, and you're buying all the stuff, and now you're getting fresh foods that have all these phytonutrients. You're having to take the time to prepare them in tasty ways. You're staying away from that boxed, canned, chemically preserved foods. You're allowing your immune system to calm, and you're allowing the phytonutrients to also lower inflammation. And we're getting back to a more natural state. Like that's how I explain the kind of broad observations that you actually had, is probably allowing unburdening the body, pissing it off less, and allowing the body to actually get back to a more natural state that's where it's capable of being less inflamed. Allow the health defenses to reassert themselves.
Yeah, I love that explanation. And moving to a whole food diet, no matter who you are, no matter what your current state of health, there's very little side effects, or negative side effects, I should say. There's many effects, mostly beneficial effects, very, very few negative side effects of doing that. One thing I must ask, Dr. Lee, before we end this conversation is, in our first chat, you mentioned many foods which have super helpful properties. Two that come to mind are kiwi fruit. You mentioned how they can actually help repair DNA, which is remarkable. The amount of people who stop me in the streets since then to say, Dr. Chatterjee, since that conversation, I've been buying kiwi. I've heard it over and over again. So that's credit to you, Dr. Lee. But also tomatoes, you mentioned. I know we covered lycopene in this conversation as well. But many people contacted me, including some family members, to say, listen, I don't tolerate kiwis. Like, I get a really bad reaction when I have them. I don't tolerate tomatoes. I get a really bad reaction when I have them. And of course, this is individual because not everyone has intolerances or reactions to certain foods. But for people who've heard your great advice and wanted to bring those in, but thought, well, I can't have that, how would you respond to them? Like, what would you say to them to give them some sort of hope?
Yeah, well, look, what I always tell people is when it comes to food and health, it's not just about the food or any single food whether it's a kiwi or a tomato. It's really about how our body responds to what we put inside it. So if you don't like kiwis, can't find kiwis, or are allergic to kiwis, all right, those are 3 easy reasons, or can't afford a kiwi, you can do a swap out. Okay, so what are in kiwis? Kiwis got vitamin C, it's got fiber. What are some other foods that actually have vitamin C that also have fiber? Red bell pepper can actually have that. What if you're like, well, I'd like something a little sweet. Okay, guava, that also has vitamin C, and it's also got fiber as well. Now, the research that we discussed last time about the kiwi was research done with kiwi itself, but the properties of the kiwi, which is vitamin C and fiber and some of the other phytonutrients, those can be found in other fruits as well. So kiwi, I always say, like, if you want to kind of stick with the research, you got to go with the food that was actually studied. But the properties and the principles allow you to actually think about how to swap things out. What a tomato, great example. I don't really like tomatoes. I'm allergic to tomatoes. Some people have hypersensitivities, like a histamine reaction to tomatoes. I remember in college, I had a classmate who would never go to the salad bar. She would stay as far away as possible because tomatoes kind of gave her this super histamine mast cell reaction. Her whole face would puff up when she actually had anything that had tomatoes on it. And well, guess what? Lycopene, if you want to get the lycopene benefits, lowers risk of breast cancer by 20%, lowers risk of prostate cancer by almost 30%, protects your DNA against sunlight. What else is lycopene? Watermelon. Yeah. Watermelon has lycopene as well. So maybe you don't like tomatoes. Maybe you can't get tomatoes. Well, what about a slice of watermelon? Yeah. And so again, these swap outs are really, and this is something I think is so important. And this is what I hope to be able to convey through my book. And I created a free masterclass. I've been trying to teach people periodically online how to do this is think about why something is beneficial for you. And then if you can get that food, that's perfectly fine. If you need to swap it out because you can't find that food or can't afford that food, think about what else might be a good stand-in. Yeah. Right. And at the end of the day, it still has to taste good for you. So maybe you don't like tomatoes, but you like watermelon. Yeah. Maybe you don't like kiwi, but you actually like guava.
Sorry to interrupt. If you are enjoying this content, there's loads more just like it on my channel. So please do take a moment to press subscribe, hit the notification bell, and now back to the conversation. We've mentioned cancer a few times in the conversation so far, and I completely agree. Even the name, I think, strikes fear into people. I don't know, when you were at medical school, when I was told the statistic that 1 in 4 people in the UK at that time, so I started in 95 at medical school, are going to develop some kind of cancer in their lifetime. That has since gone up to 1 in 3. And a few years ago in the UK, it was published that 1 in 2 adults at some point in their lifetime are going to develop cancer. So this is a pretty alarming rise. As you say, we all know people who are either suffering from, who have suffered from, or who even have died from cancer. You mentioned at the start about soy. I have never covered on this podcast food and how it can help us with cancer, whether that's for prevention of cancer or potentially as part of the treatment regime for cancer. So I wonder if you could speak to a little bit about food and how we can think about that in terms of cancer prevention and treatment.
Well, so there's a whole field of research that was developed in the 1970s by a researcher named Dr. Michael Sporn from the National Cancer Institute, looking at the opportunity of intercepting cancer before it becomes a clinical problem. This whole idea of cancer prevention. Originally, it was looking at chemicals that could prevent cancer from starting at its early stages. Then it became angioprevention, which is, can we interfere with angiogenesis so that cancers actually can't grow a blood supply as a way of controlling it. And now we know that there's plenty of foods that have been studied that actually have been shown to be associated with the reduced risk of cancer, whether it's green tea, whether it's soy, whether it's tomatoes, whether it's stone fruit, peaches and plums. There's a plethora. In fact, I write about more than 100 different foods in my book, Eat to Beat Disease, that actually have various abilities to impact on angiogenesis towards health. Now, what I think is really amazing is how foods can be used during cancer treatment. And the reason that's so poignant, and I think for people listening who may know somebody undergoing cancer treatment right now. I mean, look, you're a doctor. We're both doctors. How many times has a patient who has cancer asked us very earnestly, "Hey, doc, I've got cancer. I'm getting treated. I'm getting my chemo, but what should I be eating? Is there anything you can advise me to?" Right? That's such a common question.
Yeah.
It's a question that almost every cancer patient asks their doctor, and it's a question that almost no doctor can answer. So the typical response that a patient gets is incredibly frustrating and aggravating to them, because the doctors just say, "Yeah, you know what?" Either they say, "I don't know. There's nothing out there because no evidence on food can help," or they say, "Go eat whatever you want. Go eat some junk food or some fast food, because at least you get some nutrition. The most important thing is you don't lose weight." Well, actually, science has said both of those things are not true. Number one, actually cutting down on your caloric intake during cancer treatment actually reboots your health defenses to fight cancer. So intermittent fasting and manipulating your metabolism by lowering caloric intake actually is an anti-cancer strategy, number one. Number two, actually, there are certain foods you can eat that actually can help you fight cancer. And the best, most compelling examples all have to do with your health defenses. So there is the newest form, most profound form of cancer treatment that's a biggest advance in 100 years for cancer treatment, is immunotherapy. And immunotherapy, which is used everywhere, UK, North America, Russia, China, everywhere, is a new type of cancer treatment that doesn't poison the body like chemotherapy does. And it's not even a targeted therapy. That's like a heat-seeking missile you infuse into the body. Immunotherapy is a lot more simple and more natural in its concept. Hey, let's just use the body's own immune system and harness it to be able to destroy cancer. Because remember, we talked about this early on, like cops on the beat, the immune system conducts surveillance and takes out the bad guys, the drug dealers sitting on a street corner. Well, what happens if you had cancer, even if it's metastatic and spread? What happens when we allow your own immune system to do it? So this is now reality. Immune therapy is being given to cancer patients, and it allows your immune system to wipe out cancer. It is so dramatic that in about 20% of people, you get a phenomenal response. And in a smaller group of people, your immune system can wipe out cancer completely. I give an example of, in the US, one of our oldest living presidents is President Jimmy Carter. He's a peanut farmer. He came from the state of Georgia. When he retired from his presidency, when he finished his presidency, he went back to his sunny state, and he wanted to build houses with this nonprofit, this NGO called Habitat for Humanity. They spent a lot of time outdoors under the baking sun building houses for homeless people. Okay. And in so doing, he got a lot of sun damage, which caused mutations in his skin, which led to skin cancer that spread to his liver and his brain. So he was in his early 90s when he was diagnosed with metastatic melanoma. And because it had spread, and melanoma is such a deadly cancer, most of his doctors basically said, this is game over. So he withdrew from public life. He wrote his own obituary, and it was about to sort of just, meet his maker. And he became at peace with himself. But then at the 11th hour, he enrolled into a clinical trial of one of these immune therapies. It's something called a checkpoint inhibitor. And he got this infusion. And remarkably, at 90 years old, his own immune system reared up on its haunches and wiped out and did what it's supposed to do. It wiped out all the cancer in his brain, in his liver, all of his body. And he went from having metastatic cancer with brain metastasis. That's a game over kind of situation when you and I are training, to actually having no cancer. And he's alive today with no sign of cancer. Wow. Happened to my mother too, who had endometrial cancer in the lining of the uterus. It spread everywhere. And we put her on a immune therapy, same kind as the president did, former president. And in 3 treatments only over the course of 9 weeks, once every 3 weeks, no chemo. Okay. All of her 80-year-old immune system wiped out every bit of cancer in her body, and she's been completely cancer-free. This isn't even a cure. This is a reset. This is getting back to baseline, restoring health, because that's what your body's supposed to do.
This is kind of really full circle to what we were talking about at the start of this conversation, isn't it? The body's resilience, the body's natural ability to, patrol itself and actually repair damage and be resilient. And it's incredible now that you're talking about these drugs that are being used to really help support the immune system. But I think what you're coming to is that food can also do that as well. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, no, yes, but it's sort of the combination. So remember I said that for this type of immunotherapy, 20% of people have these really amazing responses, which means that the majority don't. And for a long time, we were scratching our heads saying, okay, what's going on? Because there's nothing more frustrating than a breakthrough that only works for a small proportion of people. We've got to use science to figure out what makes the difference. Well, so one of my colleagues, Dr. Laurence Zipvogel in Paris, she's at the Institut Gustave Roussy, which is one of the big cancer research centers of Europe, looked at 200 patients with different types of cancer, all getting immune therapy. And she looked at compared every dimension that she could between people who responded and people who did not respond very well to immunotherapy. And what she found? The difference was one bacteria in their gut. It wasn't genetics. It wasn't body size, wasn't obesity. It wasn't concomitant disease. It was actually one bacteria. That bacteria is Akkermansia muciniphila. Now, this is out of the 39 trillion bacteria in the body. This one has been studied and it's stuck out. It's kind of like finding a fossil in the hillside. There's probably a lot of fossils, but she found this one. This bacteria was present in responders. And if you had this, you responded to immune therapy and had a better outcome with cancer. And if you didn't have it, man, your outcome was not good. So how do you get this bacteria to grow? Well, it turns out it's all about your diet, because there's no probiotic you can take for Akkermansia. Akkermansia can be grown. You can grow Akkermansia in your gut by having by eating foods that help your gut secrete mucus. Now, that sounds disgusting to a lot of people. It's gross, mucousy gut. But in fact, our gut naturally secretes mucus, just like our mouth normally secretes saliva. And this bacteria, Akkermansia, its full name. Akkermansia is just its first name. Its last name is muciniphila. So Akkermansia muciniphila means it loves to grow mucus.
Yeah.
So when you actually eat foods like pomegranates, or pomegranate juice, or cranberries, or Concord grapes, or the juice from these, it prompts your gut to secrete healthy mucus. It's kind of like fertilizer in the soil. Your garden's going to love to grow better. That Akkermansia grows there. It actually makes you a responder. So that actually is a difference of how foods can make the difference in one bacteria. Now, 2 weeks ago, a landmark paper was published in the journal Science, which is one of the big, credible scientific journals, major scientific journal. This is like an 80-person study led by MD Anderson Cancer Research Center in the United States with the National Institutes of Health. And they looked again at melanoma that had spread, people getting immunotherapy. And they found that they found the second bacteria of responders. It's called Ruminococcus. All right. Now, I encourage your listeners not to stress out about remembering these fancy names. It's kind of like when you go to a museum, go to the dinosaur hall, you're not going to remember the Latin names of all the dinosaurs. You're going to remember, man, that was pretty cool. That big one. Yeah, it's called T-Rex, but you don't need to remember all the Latin names. So Ruminococcus is part of a responder profile for immunotherapy. And what they wanted to find out is what dietary intake was correlated with this healthy bacteria with a good outcome. And it was dietary fiber. And what they found is that those people who ate more dietary fiber had more Ruminococcus and had a better response. So how much fiber? They calculated it. They calculated for every 5 grams of fiber per day, they got a 30% decrease in mortality. 30, okay, on immunotherapy. Now, what's 5 grams of fiber a day? That's how much you get, 5 grams of fiber in an average size pear. That's all you need to eat a day to make this difference. Now, think about that. If you had melanoma and if you were getting immunotherapy, your doctor's probably not telling you yet to actually eat fiber. But this is the nature of breaking research in food as medicine. It's not food versus medicine. I'm not on a hilltop waving a thing of kale saying everybody should forget about their medicines and don't go to your doctor anymore. What I'm saying is that food plus medicine, it is another powerful tool in the toolbox. And people with cancer need to know that.
Yeah, they really do. And you remind me of a story I've heard you share, I think in an interview I saw of yours in the past, where there was a patient who was due to have some immunotherapy, and you checked out her stool and found out that she had no Akkermansia muciniphila. So you halted things for 3 weeks. You encouraged these kind of foods. That went up and she responded perfectly. Is that an accurate reflection of that story?
Yeah, that you captured it exactly. And so I think that, as we move into the future, we're going to be putting together this puzzle that, it's almost like we've seen what we need to do for years. We intuitively, we've known that foods can help us get better, that foods and medicine have got to work together. Why do cancer patients ask that question? Because they know inherently there's got to be something there. And so one of the things that I'm really committed to doing, in my career is trying to up the level that doctors actually have to be able to take the latest science and answer those patient questions. Like, patients don't really want to know all the mumbo jumbo, the scientific details. They're not equipped in many cases to really go into that level of detail. But doctors need to be sophisticated enough. If you can understand how an immunotherapy works, which is pretty complicated, then you need to be able to understand how a food works.
Yeah. I mean, I think you've done a wonderful job from what I've seen over the last years of spreading the word about this. Your book, Eat to Beat Diseases, I think it's a wonderful read for anyone, public or doctors, to learn more about what kind of foods can help them. I think there's over 200 foods in there that you've detailed. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. There's over 200 foods. So this whole idea that our body craves diversity. Our health defenses respond to so many different foods. So I basically put together a catalog of more than 200 foods that activate one or more or multiple health defenses. And the wonderful thing, and this is really one of the sort of the take-home messages I want your viewers and listeners to have in here, that the foods that activate our health defenses taste great. Many of them are part of traditional food cultures, Mediterranean cultures, Asian cultures. So you don't have to fear your food anymore for health. We don't have to think about taking away all the foods that we love to eat. We can actually lean into the foods that we love that are healthy for us and start there. And so one of the things that I do, I've always challenged people who go, well, I've never really liked Dr. Lee to eat healthy, so I'm kind of bummed out. I give them a Sharpie and a copy of my book, and I say, go to the tables, and I said, take 5 minutes and leaf through here and circle every food that you like to eat. And I've never met anybody who wouldn't be able to circle 10 foods at least. And then they come back to me and I'm like, look, you've identified all these circled foods, activate your health defenses. Start with these, stick with these, and then explore all these other foods out there. That's the best way to enrich our lives and our health at the same time.
Yeah, and this knowledge you give people, Dr. Lee, is very empowering, because it could be that person who does that and circles these foods goes, oh, I'm already having like mushrooms and beets. I'm already eating foods. And even that just reframes it in their mind that they're already using food as medicine for their body. You mentioned cancer patients. Of course, they want to know what else they can do, whether it's cancer or anything. Patients want to feel a sense of agency over their health and their life, right? So, no one does well when they think, well, I can't do anything. I just need to leave it up to that treatment or that doctor. We all like to feel that we're sort of playing a role and participating in our health. So I think your work and research and your books and these masterclasses you run on your website, I think are so helpful at giving people that agency. When it comes to cancer, Dr. Lee, there's a lot now about sugar and cancer. And I think this is where there's a bit of complexity around food, because some of these foods, of course, let's say kiwi fruit or, pomegranate juice or the sort of foods you're talking about, of course, some of them can raise our blood sugar. Some of them do contain degrees of sugar. I know they come with lots of other ingredients as well, but how can you help us look at that? What's the relationship between sugar and cancer? And then how does that impact the foods that we consume?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I get asked this a lot. What I try to do is to make people feel comfortable with the idea that our body needs sugar. In fact, the organ in our body that needs the most sugar is our brain. Sugar fuels our metabolism. And the key is that in most people who are able to, your body is able to process a small amount of sugar without a problem, without any problem whatsoever. And so the sugars that you might encounter in your whole foods, so fruits and vegetables, those are completely fine. Your body should be able to take care of that. It's the sugars that are dangerous for diseases and the sugars that damage your microbiome, that spark inflammation, that can even damage your DNA. That's the concept of added sugar. So it's a can of soda that's got 10 tablespoons of added sugar to it to make it really sweet. No human body can tolerate that over any period of time. And so what I try to say is that, like, it's so easy, so tempting when it comes to something like sugar to go for that all or nothing approach. No, our body needs a little sugar. Your body can actually handle most sugar. When it comes in a fruit or a vegetable, it's just fine. Added sugar, candies, cakes, sodas, okay? Those are the ones that easily overwhelm you. So if you're sensitive to sugar, just like you've got diabetes, you got to sort of cut down or cut out those things and be super mindful of making those type of choices. But fruits and vegetables, you have to look at the human data. Okay, don't focus on how much sugar is in a mango. Mango is pretty sweet fruit. Take a look at the human data to show that people who eat mango and other tropical fruits have a much lower incidence of disease X and Y and Z. Look, you can't argue with the science, and you can't argue with the data. Sugar itself, nothing that's natural is by itself inherently evil. And I think that's the thing that I'm trying to get people to think about with sugar. It's a matter of source, it's a matter of quantity, and a matter of degree.
Yeah. So I want to be very respectful to your time. I've not even scratched the surface of what I wanted to talk to you about, so maybe we can set up another conversation in the future at some point. But just to finish off the sort of cancer conversation, I'd love to mention before we end a few sort of more helpful foods, like mushrooms, for example, that you would recommend people focus on. But where does fasting fit into this? Because we talked about the addition of foods into our diet to help us repair DNA and such like. But there's also a case, isn't there, to actually withdraw foods from our body for a set period of time to help us heal and repair as well, right?
Right. So again, similarly to how we were just talking about sugar, fasting is another topic that's captured the public attention, and people think of sort of fasting as extremes. I think that we tend to think when foods in terms of extremes. Here's the science. We know that the body needs a certain number of calories just to function in its ordinary state. And we know that if you're lost in the desert and you don't have any food, you're not going to be eating, you're going to starve to death. And at some point, your body's going to run out of energy and your systems are going to collapse and you'll just shrivel up in a desert and be dead. Now, we also know that if you pound yourself and you overload yourself with calories, you're going to be unhealthy, metabolically unhealthy. You can develop diabetes, you can develop all these other chronic diseases, the chronic inflammatory state, and you're going to gain weight. And when you gain weight, the fat tissue actually is also more inflammatory. So these are the extremes you want to avoid. You don't want to die in a desert, starve, and nor do you want to actually balloon up and become deadly unhealthy, as I call it. All right. Having spelled out those bookends, let's talk about what the science tells us. The science tells us that if we restrict our calories, okay, that's called fasting. Periods that we don't eat. By the way, we all fast. When you're sleeping, you're fasting. That's why they call it the morning meal breakfast, breakfast, is because we're actually breaking our evening fast. So fasting is something we do. It doesn't have to be extreme, but we do know that when we actually restrict our calories, wonderful things happen to our health defense systems. It all comes back to our health defenses. It turns out it helps your body by restricting calories, intermittent fasting. Our body's defenses and angiogenesis help to starve cancer. It kind of helps our body cut off the blood supply to cancers. We know that when you actually intermittently fast, you call out more stem cells. Your stem cells kind of reboot, and then the fresh ones come out. So it's kind of like trying to think like changing the batteries in a flashlight. You get refreshment. We know when you intermittently fast, it also reboots your gut microbiome.
Yeah.
So, it kind of takes away some of the bad neighbors and some fresh neighbors, better neighbors that reorganize the neighborhood. We also know that intermittent fasting helps to repair your DNA, and it even slows down cellular aging at the level of the caps on the end of your DNA, the telomeres that burn down normally during aging. Intermittent fasting slows that aging process down at the cellular level. And inflammation, intermittent fasting, by the way, helps us develop a more fortified immune system, because part of the reboot at the stem cell level is to make new immune cells. So we've got fresh super soldiers produced coming right out of the oven to help our immune system. So these are ways that intermittent fasting has been shown to help our defenses. Doesn't mean that you have to do it all the time. It means that this is another technique we can use to kind of up our game periodically when it comes to our health.
Is it something you do in your own life?
The answer is yes. And I've been doing this since medical school. I don't know if this was your experience, but man, when I was in medical school, I have to say it was difficult for me to have 3 square meals a day, as they say. I would sometimes miss breakfast. I would sometimes miss lunch. I would try not to miss dinner, but sometimes I wouldn't have a meal because I was so crazy busy. And I think I naturally, over the course of a week, probably skip 3 meals a week. And that you don't have to go crazy. You don't have to be a robot to do intermittent fasting. Skipping a few meals a week actually is helpful for your body.
Sounds like you were intermittent fasting by accident before it even became a thing. Final 2 quick questions, if I can. Could you leave the listeners with some kind of top foods that you would ideally have them focus on? Appreciate that actually it's very hard to distill everything down to that. But also, you wrote your book. We're recording this end of January 2022. It came out, from what I can tell, March 2019, almost 3 years ago. If you were writing the book now, what new information would you put in it that you weren't able to put in 3 years ago?
Let me start with that question first, because the answer is I'm actually writing my next book right now.
Okay.
So I'm actually adding all and enhancing that information. So my next book is really kind of a sequel to this first book. And it's, so it's not on a completely different, it's not switching off the topic. It's like, what have we learned about the health defenses that take things to the next level? So I will create not a spoiler, but a teaser. And I will tell you that the next level of where you go with your health defenses is the metabolism. So not only can you actually improve all your health defenses, but our health defenses are inextricably wired to our metabolism, and our metabolism's obviously wired to our ability to be able to control one of the most important organs in the body. And this is a bit of a surprise. Body fat is an organ. So while many people curse the amount of body fat that they actually have, the reality is, back to the set point, we want to kind of use fat to our advantage. And so that's what my next book is about.
Amazing.
Is sort of more in the health defenses, more taking it to the level of metabolism, and then taking it to actually managing fat finally for the right reasons. Now, let's talk about some foods that everybody should know about. I'm going to purposefully tell it to people through my own lens, because I want to tell people the foods that I actually enjoy. So I enjoy green tea. Okay, here's my Earl Grey, but I have got lots of tins of green tea. I enjoy coffee. So think about it. I got tea on one end and coffee in the other. Coffee, by the way, contains chlorogenic acid. Chlorogenic acid is a natural kind of insecticide that the coffee plant makes. And so, by the way, something we didn't get a chance to talk about is what research is really revealing about how we grow our plants. Turns out that the nibbles that insects do on plants, on the leaves and stems, are perceived by the mother plant as a wound. So the response to wound healing with these little nibbles that insects make is that the plant pumps out more bioactives like chlorogenic acid. So the organic coffee bean actually has more chlorogenic acid than a conventionally grown one, because the one that's conventionally grown has all these pesticides. Now you don't have as many nibbles. And so it's not only that you have less of the pesticides, less chemicals, but you got more of the good stuff, which is a good thing. So coffee, I love coffee. I love tea. I like, among leafy green vegetables, which we all know are good for us. I like Swiss chard. I like some forms of kale, dinosaur kale. I like to cook too. Yeah, dinosaur kale, most people don't realize that's kind of this, it's got this funny pattern that looks like dinosaur skin, which is why it's darker green. That's the kind of kale that is used to make minestrone soup. So you can actually cook with it, and you blend it into the background, and you get this wonderful dietary fiber in it. Mushrooms, I love mushrooms, all kinds of mushrooms. White button, the lowly white button mushroom, packed with a soluble fiber called beta-D-glucan, which boosts your immunity, starves cancer. Most people who get button mushrooms eat the cap. The stem, actually, it's got twice as much of the good stuff, so don't throw the stems away. Save those stems, make it into a soup, cut it up to a salad, stir fry it. There's all kinds of ways you can actually use the whole plant. I like dried mushrooms as well, like porcini mushrooms, which you can buy in a specialty store or order it online. Amazing flavor for stew or for or risotto, anything else you want to make, or a pasta. I love mushrooms. Spices and herbs, I like all kinds of spices and herbs. Rosemary, basil, turmeric, cinnamon, all of those types of spices. I love the flavors. They make your food taste a lot better. Seafood. I do like salmon, but oddly, as I got into looking at food lower in a food chain that actually has great, healthy omega-3 fatty acids, polyunsaturated acids, I found that sardines are really delicious. These tin sardines. And by the way, I started this in medical school, so I'm kind of giving you a confession. I didn't have time to cook a good meal. And so if I was late night and I wanted to whip up something, I'd boil some pasta, like usually some whole grain pasta, not very much. And I would sit around looking at some really good olive oil, some tin sardines, and squeeze a lemon. And I would literally boil the pasta, put it into a pan with a little olive oil. I'd open up a tin of sardines and just with a fork, cut it up, mix it up, put some fresh ground pepper, squeeze some lemon on it, and bam, had a Mediterranean meal. Yeah. So I actually do like seafood like that. A odd confession, I actually really love squid ink. So when you have squid ink pasta, or if you go to Spain or Italy, they have these squid ink actually cuts off the blood supply to cancer. It preserves your stem cells. So many different great ingredients. And I love a juicy pear and a peach in the summer. There's nothing much more that I love than a juicy peach. But those are just some of the foods that I love. I think one of the greatest things about food is that, and food and health, is that it actually puts the agency of choice into our own individual hands. And so we make our own choices. One of the interesting things that is very clear is our body's health defenses, the 5 of them we talked about last time: our circulation, our stem cells, our healthy gut microbiome, the ability for our DNA to protect ourselves, our bodies from the environment, and also our immune system. These systems, for us to reach our health potential, we want to make sure that they are not squashed inadvertently by foods that we have gotten used to eating. And so let's talk a little about some of those foods that actually impair our health defenses. That's probably the best way of thinking about what to avoid. Now, we know that added sugar is something that taxes the body's metabolism, right? So if you have a little bit of sugar in fruit, from natural sugars, that's fine, because you're getting a lot of other stuff in fruit as well that in fact helps your metabolism and helps your body's ability to be able to digest and metabolize fructose and glucose and use that fuel into your body. But if you drink soda, to have those 10 teaspoons of refined sugar that are dissolved invisibly in whatever colored fluid we might be drinking, it tastes great, quenches your thirst,
it kind of our mental blueprint is that, this is something you use to slake your thirst on a hot summer day. And I can tell you that the hyperglycemic state, your body can't handle 10 teaspoons of sugar at the same time. And think about, the people that chug an entire can of soda, right? I mean, I've done it myself. There's no way that's good for us. So that overwhelms a lot of our systems. It overwhelms our stem cells. Our stem cells cannot adequately properly function to help us regenerate when there's too much sugar around. Sugar is a concentrated material. It's a solute, meaning that it's dissolved in water. And when there's a lot of things, I mean, think about it when you're in a swimming pool or you're in, or if you're swimming in the ocean for a long period of time, what happens? The water gets pulled out of your skin, or even in a bathtub, your skin gets wrinkly because you've sucked out all the water. And that's basically what happens to these cells in a high sugar environment in your blood. So I would say added sugar with sodas that are so popular, that is something that sits on your health defense systems. Too much sugar also literally damages the ecosystem of your gut microbiome, which is connected to your immunity. Unhappy gut, unhappy immunity. We all want to actually be as strong immunologically as possible. And then, by the way, let's kind of just take one step over to the kissing cousin of regular soda, which is diet soda, right? So here's the thing. I just told you, we might want to cut down or cut out regular soda. So what do people say? They say, well, don't worry, Dr. Lee, we just go over to the diet soda. No worries. I drink the diet version. It's much better for my metabolism. Well, science tells us it's not true. And the irony is that people who drink a lot of diet soda with the purpose of not getting a lot of carbs from refined sugar actually still gain weight. This is a kind of a paradox that now makes sense because scientists have figured out that many of the artificial sweeteners used in diet sodas actually harm our gut microbiome. And so when you're drinking that soda and that artificial sweetener, you get that sugar hit on your tongue to go to your brain. Man, it's pretty sweet. But all those chemicals go down your gut and they're feeding our gut bacteria. And the gut bacteria really don't like these synthetic compounds, these artificial sweeteners. And so they revolt. And as they're revolting, they're actually literally drowning in these artificial sweeteners. And that is bad enough because our gut bacteria actually, helps to lower inflammation. But our gut bacteria also controls metabolism, our insulin sensitivity. So when that gets upset, guess what? Our actual blood sugars raise and we actually have poorer metabolism of our energy and we actually start to gain weight anyway. So that's, kind of just two examples, but there's a lot of other foods that we might want to be careful about.
Can you just explain that term metabolism? Because it's something that I think the public hear a lot, but I think it's not always that well understood.
Glad you're asking that question. Here's what I will tell you, because I'm actually working on a project now on metabolism.
Yeah.
Metabolism isn't that well understood by doctors either. And it's actually not even that well understood by scientists. And that's part of the mystery of the human body, that gigantic question mark. What is our metabolism, right? So here we are thinking about metabolism, I think classically as energy. Our metabolism is, these are some assumptions. Our metabolism is something we're born with, I have a lot of body fat, so I got the unlucky straw in family genetics. Look at my sister. She's skinny as a stick. She's lucky she inherited the thin gene for her metabolism, right? So that's one assumption that we make about metabolism. And that infers, and it's wrong, by the way, but that infers that our body's metabolism is the machinery that's used to take energy that we put into our body. That's our food that we eat. How our body processes that energy in order to be able to load up on fuel, and then how our body takes that fuel in the fuel tank, like filling the gas tank with petrol, and then actually uses that fuel as we get on the highway and drive. That's not incorrect, okay? But what we're really beginning to realize is that metabolism is a lot more complicated than that, because it's connected to our immune system. It's connected to our inflammation. It's connected to our ability to actually maintain our health in the sense that body fat is not necessarily bad. It's actually really good. And so many of the assumptions of metabolism, energy, and all the negative aspects of it, an athlete who's in his top shape has got great metabolism, whereas somebody who actually is obese has terrible metabolism. Not as simple as we thought.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I think that's really, really helpful. So in terms of categories and types of foods that we should think about limiting or avoiding, the first thing you went to was those drinks with added sugar, soft drinks, fizzy drinks, soda, in whatever country you're in, however you like to refer to it. I hope it's generally well known that actually those things are damaging for our health, our immune system, our teeth. And you beautifully explained why that is. Now, before we go to diet drinks, because I'm really glad you brought that up, full sugar fizzy drinks, is it just the sugar that's causing problems because it overwhelms our system and we can't process it? Or is it something else? Is it the sugar and the chemicals and the impact they have on other aspects of our body's health? And potentially those 5 defense systems that you've written beautifully about in your book. What's going on there? Is it just the sugar or is it something else?
Yeah. The soft drinks, the sodas that we see so commonly around us, it's part of everyday modern life, for the last 100 years or so. It's interesting. The history of soda is really fascinating. It dates back into Europe, where people were trying to find additional ways to be surprised and delighted by beverages, right? So the traditional drinks were always tea or coffee. Of course, the most popular beverage in the world is just drinking water, the most important one actually as well, tea and coffee following close behind. And then there was wine. Right. I mean, these were for thousands of years sort of the elixirs, so to speak, of our beverages. And carbonation was actually added to fruit juice. First, it was a mistake, I think, that was made when they invented it. But then actually it became something to delight folks, kind of like you go to a carnival, and you see some spectacle that actually is just something you walk by and you think, oh my gosh, that's so unusual. That's delightful. That's how sodas were actually drank. And then once actually the big industries came in and turned it into a marketing buzz, it started to take on a life of its own. And here's where it morphed. Went from fruit juices that actually had some carbonation, which is just gas, CO2, and that's okay. But what wound up happening is that they started to have less fruit, but they figured out how to put chemical flavorings that actually mimic the fruit flavoring. And then, of course, nobody really wants to have just a plain watery looking carbonated drink. So then they started to add artificial coloring, and then they started to add preservatives. And this goes to the importance of reading a label. Whenever I actually pick up something to drink, from a store, a grocery store, I'm an explorer, so I love to actually try new things. If I saw a drink in a store that seemed appealing or attractive or intriguing to me, I might pick it up. But the first thing I do is I take a look at the label. What is in there, right? So it should be mostly water. So I look for that. And then many people don't know this, but the order in which the ingredients appear on a label, at least in the United States, is synonymous with their relative concentration in the drink. And so what you want to do is it's usually water, and then it's sugar. All right. So we just talked about that, or artificial sweetener. And then you start seeing the other things behind it. And I think most people will be astounded and disappointed, rightfully so, that natural fruit juice is usually pretty low on a list of 10 or 20 ingredients. And so if you're creeped out by not being able to pronounce, understand, identify the ingredients on a beverage, you should follow your instincts. That's probably not something you want to put in your body, because your body's not hardwired to handle those chemicals.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, something I use with my patients as well. People say there's always exceptions. Yeah, there are exceptions, but as a general principle when looking at ingredient labels, I completely echo that. If you don't recognize it, maybe give it a miss and choose something else instead. You also mentioned marketing there when you were talking about fizzy drinks, and that really is something that we're fighting. You are trying to promote all this incredible, colorful food, but what we're fighting is this marketing machine, and in particularly around, I guess, soft drinks and fizzy drinks and sodas. It's really tragic to see sports stars who are looked up to by children. You certainly have seen this in the UK for many years. You see this in a big way in India, where the big cricket stars are often sponsored and are seen drinking a can of soda. And actually, I think this is one of the big problems we're up against, because that just infuses into these young kids' mind that actually I want to be like that person. oh, they're drinking that drink. Oh, I want to drink that and be like them. How much of a problem do you think marketing is? Sponsorship, product placement, commercial deals. Is that something we need to be fighting against?
I think that we all have the freedom, most of us, to make our own choices. And I try to think about any argument, such as the one we're discussing now, from both sides of the coin. If you run a company and then your company is making a product, your job is to market it, whether it's a soda or whether it's a tennis shoe or whether it's a wristwatch, right? On one hand, I don't blame companies for actually doing marketing, and the ones that actually do it really well, hey, you know what? That's their job. Okay. On the other hand, I think that the fight that we're actually having is not really against the company. The fight is really against the inertia that many of us have in the community to do our homework on and to get back in touch with our body. Because I think that if we actually, took a look in the mirror and started to reacquaint ourselves with what our body is telling us. I mean, look, here's how I think about it. You get up in the morning, you take a shower, you step out of the shower, you're going to see the mirror. You look in that mirror. Most people aren't that happy. Most people are not that happy with what they see. They can always find something wrong with themselves, and then you might step on a scale and you might not like that number. Okay. And then those are the few moments of clarity in a day where you might actually be thinking about yourself. And then we get dressed and we go off and we're just swept up with the rest of our lives, whether it's our jobs, whether it's our families, whether it's other responsibilities. And we leave ourselves behind. Oftentimes we deprioritize what our body needs. And I think that one of the things, the inertia we're fighting against, is actually all those other distractions in our life. I actually think that, one of the things that we could do to teach children, and one of the things we could do to teach young parents, one of the things we could do to help teachers, whether it's grade school, high school, or college or beyond, is to really reemphasize the fact that we all need to be in touch with our bodies. We need to know ourselves first. Knowing yourself first allows you to then discern whether or not a message that you're seeing on television or being promoted by a sports star, or whether something that is being marketed to you in a grocery store is something that you want to partake in, right? And so I think that, yes, we should be vigilant, and we should enact policies that prevent predatory marketing practices to people that are uninformed and are highly vulnerable, like marketing to children, with certain ads like that. I think that is something that works, and therefore it's something that really we do need to actually push back against. But on the other hand, I think companies are just doing their job. I think that we have our own decision. We need to push back on the predatory practices of companies that are preying on the vulnerable. And we also need to be able to lift up the consumers so that they are smarter, wiser, more in touch with themselves, and then they actually can discern what they should be ordering or buying that can actually help themselves.
Yeah, I really appreciate that nuanced answer, looking at it from both sides. You mentioned sugar and these soda drinks that we know certainly even small amounts consumed regularly can be quite damaging for our health. And then you went to artificial sweeteners in these diet drinks. Now, I share the same perspective as you do on this, but it does appear to be a very divisive topic with the public, but even within science and within medicine, this whole topic of whether artificial sweeteners are good, bad, or neutral seems to get a lot of people's backs up. I know Professor Tim Spector, who has been on the show before, and he's pretty clear as well that we should be avoiding them. You seem to be pretty clear on that. I certainly take the precautionary principle with my patients to say, listen, I've seen enough data that suggests it's having a negative impact on the gut microbiome. So I would prefer to take that precautionary approach to say, let's try something else. What is your view on that? And why do you think it's such a divisive topic?
Well, first of all, every kid loves candy, right? Me as well. I remember when I was a child, in the US, we had Halloween, and who didn't look forward to collecting all the candy from the neighbors? And I think that, sugars, the candies, they're delightful, and there's nothing wrong with being delighted. And I think we carry with us lots of pleasant, fun memories. I think brain's also hardwired to actually go after sweet things, right? I mean, it's part of our instinct as animals to, just like the lion on the savannah goes after the antelope. I think humans, on the street go after candy. It's one of those things that just we're hardwired to go after sugar. I think there are industrial interests that actually, pose counter arguments to the harm of sugars and artificial sweeteners. And by the way, I do want to actually bring this up because I think it's important. Let's not character assassinate categories. I think that's really important. So artificial sweeteners, let's be specific. Okay. What I was referring to are things that are not refined sugars, the powdery white stuff that you would buy in a supermarket. The artificial sweeteners are the ones that are chemically synthesized, not natural, that actually have been designed to activate the sugar receptors on your tongue and mimic sweetness.
Right.
Okay. And there's many different kinds. And so I think that if anybody were to go to Google and look up categories of artificial sweeteners, you'll start seeing this is not one product. It's a many different types. Some people could consider artificial sweeteners stevia. Now, stevia is a natural sweetener, but it's still artificial when you compare it to refined sugar. And what about, like some people use monk fruit, which is also a natural sweetener, which isn't the same thing as refined sugar. It also activates your sugar taste buds. It's more natural. And then what about aspartame and sucralose? And what about all those other kind of chemical names that you can't pronounce? And so I think as we're talking about this now, we need to say categorically, I think excess natural sugars in product form added to food, it's added sugars, tend to be unhealthy if you overconsume that. And soda is just one of many examples with lots of added sugar. Artificial sweeteners is not one category. It's a lot of different types of things that are used in place of refined sugar. And what I would say to be a savvy consumer, just know that there are more natural versions of those. I think stevia is fine. However, there are stevia that actually are not really all stevia. You pick up the package, you look at the ingredients, and you find even though it says stevia, you look at the ingredients and you actually see that there are other things that are added to it. We cannot forget when you buy ultra-processed food in a package, stuff has been added to it, almost certainly, even to preserve it on the shelf, that may or may not be good for you. And one of the big advantages we have right now, every one of us carries around one of these, a mobile phone. And so if you don't recognize something and you're curious, go ahead and type it in and search that chemical to learn something about it. That could actually make the difference between whether you put it in your cart or not.
Yeah, I love that. Very empowering way of looking at this, to put the information in the consumer's hands and say, right, you start as much as possible to make these better decisions because you know that this one's going to lead to health. This one's probably going to not promote my health over a period of time.
I mean, look at what happens when we sit down at a restaurant, right? You open a menu and the waiter comes over and says, do you have any questions? And so all of us have done this. You pick one that kind of seems interesting to you and you ask, what's that question we ask? You ask the waiter, hey, what's in this? All right, what's in this dish? And they tell you, and on the basis of the information that you asked for as a consumer on food that you're about to purchase and eat, you might say, oh, well, that sounds pretty good, I'll have it. Or you might say, that doesn't sound so great to me. I think I'll choose something else. And I think that the power is in the pocket of the consumer, and it's our money, our resources that we're spending. And by the way, I mean, you can see this now with, global and the geopolitical events that are happening. If we choose not to support something, it can have a powerful impact. And that impact actually comes from our pocketbooks.
Yeah. Apart from these drinks that we've covered so far, any other sorts of foods that we should generally try and avoid? Let's say when we're in the grocery store or the supermarket, anything we should think about?
Yeah, so I think, largely for the same reasons of having chemicals being put in our body that we don't really want. Ultra processed foods that come in a box, foods that got lots of ingredients and lots of preservative and chemicals inside them, things that they say that your grandmother, if you showed her, might not recognize as food, or great grandmother perhaps. Ultra processed foods as a group tend to be associated when we look at populations with poorer health outcomes from diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular disease, and even cancer. And so again, even though I said we should be careful not to overgeneralize, it is true. Things in a box, things in a can, things, that are manufactured at scale and intended to sit on the shelf for months or maybe even years tend to draw the attention, my attention anyway, that it really is worth reading the label and knowing what it is you're putting in your body. So ultra processed foods, I think alcohol is another thing that is popular. It's social. I mean, look, if you look at beer and wine, these go back millennia as part of human culture. People sat and distilled and fermented beer and wine for thousands of years, in the Colosseum in Rome. They're still doing excavations to figure out what the gladiators actually ate and drank. And they find inside there, wine casks and things like that. Like it's a cherished tradition of humans. But what we do know is that it's easy to over consume. And we do know that while there are healthful properties in the liquid of wine due to the fermentation, it pulls things out of the red grape skin or pulls things out of the barley hops in the case of beer, like xanthohumerol in beer or resveratrol in red wine. The fact of the matter is that none of the benefits that you get from any alcoholic beverages come from the ethanol, the alcohol itself. The thing you get the buzz from does nothing for your health. Okay. Some of the other things that happen to be in the broth of the fermentation might be good for you. And so that's something that, oh, well, they found that, and I think recently there was research showing that, even one glass of red wine could have an impact on brain health as well. And I think that, we have to be, I'm really careful about not chucking a spear, at every food that, we want to kind of malign for a health reason. I think wine is a cherished tradition. Alcohol is a cherished tradition, but people should know that the benefits of it, and it's okay to have a glass or two every now and then. But I think that the people who really go after it hard, look, besides the obvious liver disease and the problems of nutrition and the brain health, I mean, alcohol is a toxin to your brain. We do want to actually be mindful about the amounts that are consumed. Processed meats are another food product that actually are classed as a carcinogen by the World Health Organization. Now, what kind of processed meats are we talking about? We're not talking about the air-cured salami from Sardinia, that have been made in the same way for thousands of years that people eat sparing amounts of, as part of a more well-balanced Mediterranean traditional meal. I'm talking about the deli foods. You go in there and they're slicing stuff, from a big lump that looks nothing like the animal from which it came. Yeah. And some of these cured sausages, if you visit a sausage factory, I had a patient once who actually worked as an inspector in a commercial sausage plant. And he told me that he used to have to change his boots every month, rubber boots, walking in there, because the stuff that splashed out of the pool in which the sausages were essentially embalming it for preservatives and for flavorings would actually dissolve the sole of his rubber boot. Oh, man. That made such an impression on me. I'm still talking about it 20 years later.
If that conversation resonated with you, here is another incredibly powerful one that I really think you're going to enjoy. Give it a click and let me know what you think.
When you consume sugar, you are poisoning your mitochondria. Sugar and cyanide do the same thing. Ultimately, if you're inhibiting your mitochondria, you are poisoning your body.